Good afternoon and welcome to the Board of Select meeting this afternoon, June 12th. It is 4 p.m. and we're going to be interviewing 3 candidates this afternoon for the town administrator position, as we talked about last Monday night. Some residents have sent in questions for us to consider to ask today. We will not be taking questions from the conference call, as this is the real interviews that we'll be doing, and they will be done by the select board. We will call each candidate in. They've got an hour interview with us, and we'll start off with them introducing themselves and telling us a little bit about their past and what they hope to achieve here in Holliston. And then I will ask the clerk of the Board of Select for her to ask questions or remarks, and then I will ask the vice chair, John Cronin, to ask questions, and then I will ask questions. So that's the way we'll handle it. And we can bring in candidate number 1, Travis Ahern. Good afternoon, Travis.
Good afternoon, Travis.
Hello. And welcome. And we do have residents on the conference call, Zoom, also listening in, although they won't be asking questions. And I also wanted to point out that we have Bernie Lynch and his assistant Sharon here from Paradigm Services. And they've been doing a great job helping us with professional services for our finding ourselves a new town administrator, and they've been working with the search committee that we have in town, and we want to thank the search committee immensely for all the work that they've done. So if Travis, you would like to tell the folks back home and our board a little bit about yourself and some of your history and why you think you might be a great candidate for us.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. Let me know if speaking through a mask at this distance is working for HCAT. Travis Ahern, my expertise is in municipal finance. My experience in municipal government has been the town of Weston originally, most recently the town of Danvers, and my current role is at the MWRA Advisory Board, which is a regional water and sewer solution for 60 communities in the greater Boston area. Through my experience, I have been aware of and interact quite often with the MMA, which is where I saw the posting for this position. And the way that the position was written seemed to fit me very well, which is one of, I'm very happy where I am, but it did, the posting statement did seem like it would be something that I would potentially fit well with the town. I was familiar with the town from my wife and I having recently relocated. We had looked at Holliston, which is why I was familiar with it. We ended up in Wayland. We'll be there almost 2 years this month. And so I started to look into it and then reached out to Bernie regarding if it was a potential fit. The one thing that I would mention from my experience as well, assistant town manager is not on my resume. I would say that my experience in Danvers is very comparable to that. And we can get into that as you ask questions about my experience, but I was part of the executive team there in addition to that role, which developed over time as I became actually the director of administration and finance, as I took on procurement. There was also, in addition to my MPA, my Master's in Public Administration program at Northeastern, I took multiple leadership courses through the town of Danvers. One was a joint MMA and Collins Center leadership program for public service, and one was the LEAD program down at the University of Virginia. So specific to Holliston, as I said, I was familiar with the town. I think my experience in Weston and Danvers, Holliston is sort of lies between those two in a mix. Obviously, select board run, town meeting. In Danvers is an elected town meeting, Weston, a representative town meeting, Weston open town meeting as it is in Holliston, 3-member board of a select board in Weston, 5-member in Danvers. So all of the sort of challenges that were listed out all, tick the boxes of things that I'm interested in, and I feel I can bring a lot to Holliston. I think the size of the community is perfect for what I'm looking for. And then just personally, as I have a young family, the proximity to where my wife and I ended up choosing Wayland, because of the nature of the executive type positions in municipal government, the night meetings, having proximity, 20-minute drive after night meetings, it wasn't tenable in Danvers, but I feel like it would be in Holliston. So that's sort of where has brought me here today, and why specific to this posting in Holliston.
Great. Thank you. Mrs. Hine.
Well, so Mark, can you just clarify? Do you see this as a bit of a back and forth with the questions, or you'd like me to ask?
I think if you could ask 3 or 4 questions, and then John will, and then I will, and then we'll do it again,
Ah, okay.
so that you can kind
That's
of...
helpful. Yep. Okay, so nice to meet you, Travis. It's always good to see the smiling face underneath the mask. You stated you came away from a home buying search of communities in the area with an appreciation of all that Holliston has to offer, and you mentioned specifically passive and active recreation within the town. From your search when considering a move to Holliston or the area, I'd like to hear your thoughts on areas of focus for strengthening our community in the near and longer term future.
So the things that came up in my personal home search, obviously I was looking at taxes, I think, in comparison to the other areas in proximity to Holliston. You're looking at the quality of the schools and the cost, the services provided by the town. The recreation obviously was one that, with a young family, we are looking to be outdoors a lot. That's something that Holliston had to offer. It's something that we, was comparable to other communities. And then proximity to the city of Boston is something that, obviously is mentioned when you are being reviewed by S&P or anybody else looking at, the economic strength of the town. But it's also something that me as a potential resident was looking at as somebody that potentially would be working in Boston or access to the job market through that. So I think that's what led me to the area, the 495 split, the 95 split. Growing up in the area, I'm from Newton originally. My wife is from central New York, so we were looking for kind of a mix between Newton and a little bit more rural, and that's sort of what led us here. And again, everything ticked the boxes, and I think the reason we ended up in Wayland is probably just as much, the job search. The home search can be really whatever's on the market at the time. We did end up choosing Wayland in part because of proximity to Boston. I think one of the challenges, especially going forward for Holliston, is going to be having people have access. I think the 495 Metro West partnership has Holliston at around 11% of your workforce commuting to the city. I don't know if that will change in a post-COVID-19, but that's something certainly to consider that's valuable information to have, and it did impact my personal search.
Can you describe your approach to staff meetings? How often should they be held, and what's your preferred format for staff meetings?
So the staff meetings that I would see in this position would obviously be at the department head level most often. Having town-wide staff meetings is pretty uncommon, and usually more on an emergency basis. The staff meetings that I would foresee in this position would be, making sure that all department heads are on the same wavelength, especially what you don't want to see when you have some departments that are overseen by boards that don't always interact with each other is a siloed approach. So getting department heads together on a at least monthly basis is probably a necessity. And then it is finding a balance. I think to the point that you're driving at with the question is having too many meetings for the sake of meetings is wasting everybody's valuable time. Department heads in a town this size are generally have a lot on their plate. So I would say if everything is moving smoothly and it's really just a matter of checking in, then I would see that being a monthly basis. If there's issues that need to be addressed, and it's going to, especially during a crisis like COVID-19, that may tick up a little bit, especially if you're going to need multiple department heads pitching in areas where they may not typically see it, but their staffs are going to need to step up and work well with other departments that they don't generally work with. You could see that tick up, but on a normal basis, I would say once a month.
Like most of our neighboring communities, Holliston has not seen a significant shift in the percent of our levy raised by property taxes on commercial and industrial businesses in the past 2 decades. It remains around 9 to 9.5%. Describe the approach you would take to building the industrial and commercial tax base for the town of Holliston.
So building the industrial commercial tax base, I think this was something that came up because of the position statement as well when I was speaking with the selection committee, or the steering committee, excuse me, and the position statement clearly states that Holliston considers itself to be a residential community, and I think that's accurate, but at the same time, if you compare it to a town that I live in, like Wayland, or a town I worked in, like Weston, there is a greater commercial tax base. I think there's the base there to work off of. I think the other thing that was clear, some of the questions that I was asking the committee was, there's a need for economic development, but we want to maintain the character of the town. Well, in a lot of towns, that means you're unwilling to sort of think outside the box, but in Holliston, you have cannabis growing industry coming to town that some towns have said no to. So to me, that shows a willingness of Holliston to be a little bit flexible in terms of we do want to make sure that we're uncovering every stone to make sure that we're doing what we can to reduce the burden on the residential tax base. Obviously, you also have in Holliston one tax rate. In Danvers, we did have a split. It was a shift from residential to commercial. There are pros and cons to that, as there are anywhere else. I think if simply what it is a desire to bring in businesses so that you're broadening the tax base, but you don't plan on shifting the tax rate to commercial, I think that is potentially very enticing to businesses and should be part of the sell. And then the other thing I would say is specific to making yourself enticing businesses is having specific regions, that parts of your town that bring people in. So downtown in every small town in Massachusetts is a big thing. I would point to engaging somebody like MAPC, who just did a downtown revitalization study in Topsfield, which obviously is north of here, and I'm familiar because of Danvers, but does have similar demographics to this town. And the more of those types of things where a business is coming in and then their work staff, their workforce has a downtown to go to, and it's a total package sort of approach, I think. And obviously you've established here the economic development committee under the select board. So I would sit down with that group, and I think one of the biggest things that a town can do, there's a lot of people who pound their chest about economic development, but in reality, the biggest thing a town can do is make sure that any business that's looking at your town sees no roadblocks. It's very clear what's expected of them for whether or not they're dealing with, health, building, code. It's very clear what's expected of a business, and any hurdles are up front, and the town shows a willingness to work through all of those. I think that's what any business is going to look for. Beyond that, obviously, you're going to see now the city of Framingham, formerly the town of Framingham, is big into TIFs. They use that for TJX. They use TIFs for Jack's Abbey Brewer. Those can certainly be used. My concern in a town this size would be if I was another existing business, where's my benefit? But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be explored. As I said, every stone unturned, and that would be something that would need to be discussed at a town-wide level. Okay,
this will be my last question for this round. It's a two-part question. Is climate change real?
Yes.
If yes, what should every town be doing to address it, and what should every citizen be doing to address it?
So, yes, it is, and I think it does start at a personal level. What are you doing for your footprint? I think there's mixed messages at the personal level. One of the things I've thought about is, should I be driving an electric car? I've stopped at that level. I haven't got there because, to me, how are we producing electricity in the Northeast at the moment? It's all through natural gas. So I'm not sure I've fully gotten on board. You do see the town of Brookline that has now said any new buildings in town must be electric for heat. Clearly, they feel that that's the future. I'm not sure that might be a step too far of where we are at the moment. What should the town be doing? I think the sustainability avenue you've gone down, the gentleman that you hired, I think originally it was supposed to be in conjunction with Sherburne, and it didn't end up that way. But I think that those are steps that towns need to be taking. I think your change in solid waste, where you're pushing recycling, those are steps that absolutely need to be taken. And some of that's market driven, but some of it is also, when you make a change like that, you have the ability to change how residents view those types of things, change actual behavior. But if the town believes strongly in it, then the town also needs to take action for itself. So the electric vehicles you have outside of town hall are an excellent step, but also working with every available dollar through the state. I know that Holliston has been involved with the MVP program. It's a little up in the air at the moment. COVID-19 did not help that, obviously, roll out through the environmental bond bill. But the environmental bond bill is sort of the second iteration of money that I think will probably be coming up again, most likely in an economic stimulus package in a couple of years, and the town, if it's a priority for the town, should be ready to take any opportunities. I think, I did watch a few of the meetings and how you turn back the MVP money. I think that was the right call, but being available and continuing to pursue it is the best you can do in some regard. I think for the most part, having a consolidated sort of approach through a sustainability coordinator is really how you're going to see all the things that you have done, and it's going to show you where you can still improve.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. John, a few questions.
Welcome to Holliston. Travis, thank you. Nice to meet you.
you.
In your cover letter, you mentioned to appease Danvers stakeholders, from Standard & Poor's analysts to the average citizen and everyone in between. You created a handful of critical reports and documents that cover all aspects of the town's finances and priorities. Each document could be reviewed on an executive summary. For the benefit of the folks on the panel tonight and those watching at home, can you give us a description of what those reports and that information look like?
Sure. So the reports that I did for Danvers. So first off, when I got to Danvers, the town manager had just retired after 30 years. I was working for a new town manager. One of the things S&P said essentially was everything this town has done has been great, but how do we know it's going to stay in place? And so they downgraded the management grade, and the town wanted to be AAA. And so one of the things I said about was putting all the practices into policies. And anybody can write a policy. One of the things is proving that you're following the policy. So we had tracking, mostly that's tracking reserves and all the other types of policies, the debt numbers that we had in place. And so when I said I put some things in to make various stakeholders happy, I'll give you an example. The debt policy in Danvers, their practice had always been we don't go above our debt service level in a given year does not go above 6% of our expenditures. And I said, that's fine, I can put that in the policy, but you're not going to get AAA. S&P wants that number to be 10 in your policy. If you want AAA, that's in there. And I'm not going to tell you how your policy is written. You're the select board, you tell me. But what we were able to do was essentially say, all right, the goal of the town is to keep debt service at 6%. The max is 10%. So S&P is happy that 10% is in there. The select board's happy that 6% is in there. And then how do you frame that conversation? Why the two different numbers? And 4% in the policy we consider to be the cushion that the town has in borrowing capacity in the event of an emergency, right? So everybody's happy, numerous stakeholders, and we haven't done anything in the policy that upsets how the town feels about debt service. Now, to the question of how to track those things, and what we're doing in the reports is that not the regular resident who's showing up at town meeting. In Danvers, it's a little bit different than here because it's not. You might not just be showing up because you're interested in one thing on the warrant. you are a voted member in Danvers. But for the average resident who's looking at a policy, we have multiple policies, one of which makes sense to the resident who goes to town meeting, which is the free cash policy. We want free cash in this number. But I also needed to make a policy to make the auditor happy that says, here is the unassigned fund balance policy. Now, free cash and unassigned fund balance are very similar, but they're also different, and it's a very boring conversation of why they're different. So each policy needs to have an executive summary, so if you're just off the street and you just want to know what we're talking about, here's an executive summary. But if you're a finance committee member that feels like I get in the weeds on every single subject, well, that information needs to be there as well. So what I like to do for most things, all of this has to do with tracking for S&P to make sure everything we said we're going to do, we're doing. Tracking, make sure that somebody says, well, we have this amount of free cash this year. What does that mean? Where was it 3 years ago when we did X project? That's in there. So it's an issue of showing it multiple ways. Some people like to read. Some people want to see one image. They think they get it and move on, or they do get it and move on. And so it's an issue of presenting information in a way that is approachable to multiple people, and also making sure that all the detail is available to those who want to be.
Did you collaborate with staff when you were drafting these policies, or did you, what was the approach to building the data and the information?
So I was the first finance director in the town of Danvers history. Previously, it was the town accountant and the assistant town manager had sort of split the duties. The budgeting and the procurement were done by the assistant town manager. The day-to-day accounting oversaw payroll and those sorts of things. So there wasn't really, the accountant had retired, that's why the finance director position was created, and the assistant town manager was sort of leaving, but she was a great asset to me when I got there. So there was a lot of history that I wanted to get from the outgoing town manager who I got to work with, because I was the administrator of the retirement system and he was on the board. So I did use quite a few people, more just to say, I'm not trying to make new policy in the town of Danvers. I'm trying to take practices that S&P is concerned are not ingrained or not written, so they could change, and they don't want that, and make them written. So yes, I did use the resources, the outgoing assistant town manager, the previous town manager, but other than that, it was really making sure that the select board was comfortable with it. The 6 and 10% example for debt was really, I mean, it's just one example. It was sort of the prime one that it was, finding a common ground. For the most part, otherwise it was,
Okay.
it's not always easy to verbalize how something's done in a way that looks like it's a policy, and that was sort of the trick to it.
You, in your cover letter, you mentioned, I plan on being a resident in the region for years to come, and I'd embrace the opportunity to help steer and develop a master plan. What kind of experience do you have developing a master plan? How would you go about doing one for Holliston?
So the approach that I would have to it, I think before the master plan can come into place, it sounds like a comprehensive capital improvement program is probably your next step. And I think that I would use that to then launch into the master plan. So for the CIP specifically, I think one of the conversations that I caught on I think a program with you, Mr. Cronin, a member of the finance committee, and the outgoing superintendent of schools on the SOI for the high school project, for example, is yes, there's an SOI on a project that's coming, which is going to potentially be a good portion of our debt service for years to come, but that doesn't mean we can't be focused on other capital projects. I think that's the right stance on that, and I think that one of the things that I take away from that is you need to have a few projects that are ready to go when inevitably the state is looking to recover from COVID-19 and the next iteration of the environmental bond bill comes.
But isn't capital planning and master planning, aren't they mutually exclusive? Are they different, Travis?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that the reason I'm prioritizing that originally is that, as I said, you need to be ready when opportunity comes in terms of funding that is not specifically tax dollars in Holliston. So I think that would be a priority. But through that process, I think would also be me as a town administrator going around and seeing all of the needs throughout the departments that they say are their capital needs. Now, you're right, that's not the same thing. But what happens when you do that, when you look at capital projects and capital needs that span 30 years, you're asking similar questions that go with a master plan. And so, for example, the the water treatment plant that you have coming, and that does tie into my experience at the MWRA as well. What I would say there is you've done the right thing. You're ready to do the water treatment plant, which is going to it's going to give you clean water for residents, which is a core function of the town for the foreseeable future. But 30 years from now, especially if all of the economic development desires come to fruition, do you even have enough water for the future, right? That's the master planning question that goes with the capital question before it. And I think that that's where they do tie in. You're right that they are separate. The other thing I would say is specifically once you move beyond the SOI process and the MSBA, which I've been through in Danvers as the MCPPO representative on the school building committee that was an elementary school, but and the high school is a different animal. But that is also a similar project where you're looking at a capital plan, but within that capital plan, you're saying, what does education look like in 30 years? Because we're building a high school that is going to be our high school for 30 years. So that is sort of the perspective that I'm bringing, and I'm not bringing a planner perspective. That's not my background. But because I've been at the table on so many different conversations through my finance background, through my procurement background, which is always involved in these types of projects, I've got a good feel, and I have a significant interest. As I said, I think I mentioned in the beginning when I may have rambled a little bit, but that's sort of what drew me most to this posting. I think that my background works well for Holliston, how the position statement was written, but my interest is really around getting involved in the master plan.
Let's talk about your experience briefly. It looks like since 2007, you spent 4 years at State Street Corporation, 2.5 years with the town of Weston, and 3 years at the town of Danvers. You've been back at the advisory board for about 2 years. Is that about right?
Absolutely.
There's not a lot of jumping, but in terms of length of stay, how can Holliston get a sense that you'll be around to stay for a while? Can you give us an idea of your commitment, please?
Sure. I think that's a fair criticism of me on paper would be that I have moved a little bit. I would say that the move from Danvers to the MWRA Advisory Board, just for some background, is obviously I had left there for Danvers, which was a significant bump, and then I was recruited back as the number 2 in that office had left, and it was clear that I was moving to Wayland. So my former boss, who wanted me back, approached me. And this question also came up with the screening committee, and I would say the same thing I said to them, which is all of those moves, at the time were all sort of progression in my career. The move from Danvers to the MWRA Advisory Board most recently was a lot to do with my family moving to the area. My wife and I finding our forever home, as HGTV likes to call it. And, at this point, I've never really been in a job where I've also sort of known exactly that I'll be in that geographic area for at least until my children graduate high school, and probably I can't see moving after that. So I think, just because of where I am in my life as much as my career, this makes sense. And I think the town of Holliston could feel that I'll be around.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions, but I'll wait until after you're done.
Yeah, we'll
I know
do
you
the
wanna do a little
second
cycle.
round.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yes.
Is your MCPPO certification still intact, or is it lapsed?
It would be intact right now, and I would need, I believe, in July, I would just need to take the course to get it active.
Good, thank you. Sorry, Mark.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a few questions, and then we'll start with the second round with Tina again. With the town administrator position, you wear many hats, and I would like to know what would you say is the most important aspect that you'd be bringing as a town administrator to Holliston, with all the various hats that you'd have to wear? What would be the most important job that you would be doing?
So what I would be bringing, obviously, I'm essentially in this scenario the CAO, CFO, and CPO of the town.
Right.
So that's on me, and not much room for delegation in the current structure of the organization. I think so. That's sort of the hats that I wear and probably would wear for this foreseeable future. in addition to that, the role that I would play within the organization is not to be the health director or the tech director. It would be a universal approach to all of those service areas in town, bringing a universal approach to that. Generally, that's going to happen at least once a year on a budgeting basis, but also, on a day-to-day basis, making sure that all of the departments are at least communicating in a way that we're getting economies of scale in some regards, that everybody's working well together, and that the end user, the resident, is getting an excellent experience anytime they're dealing with the town.
Okay. So out of those hats, is there one that you think is the most important out of them all, or do you think they're all about the same importance?
I'm not going to say that one is more important than the other. I think if the CAO role is not going well, then the people who are working for the town are not happy. If the CFO role is not going well, then the people who are paying the tax bill are not happy. If the CPO role is not going well, then vendors who are providing services to the town are not happy. I don't know that I would say one is more important than the other. I think for the organization to be able to pursue a master plan, get everything that needs to be done, especially in the next probably 3 budget cycles following COVID-19, if everything goes well, make sure that services are being provided at the same level and not cut, that the role that would be most important coming in the door the first day is making sure that all the department heads are supported in a way and are working together, and that I'm helping to make that happen.
Right, great. Can, at the MWRA, can you tell us or explain your financial responsibilities there?
Sure. So when the MWRA was established in 1985 to solve, amongst other things, the horrible condition of the Boston Harbor, what became clear was that the MWRA would have the borrowing authority, which would then be passed on, the responsibility passed on to member communities through the legislation. So legislators at the time had the foresight to say, we need somebody protecting the interests of those communities, and the advisory board was set up. So what the advisory board does is represent the community's interests. Sometimes, the MWRA is pulled in directions that the state would want to see. It's considered, at this point, to be an environmental agency. Sometimes that comes with it, the state wanting costs to be passed to the MWRA. Our role is to represent the communities. And so what we also do on an annual basis by statute is review their budget. It's a very large budget. They have a huge 5-year capital plan, which we also review. This year, how that looked was doing things that we've done for 30 years a little bit differently, and 35 years, excuse me, and accelerating the budget review process, immediately getting down to 0 for communities to have assessment information. They pay assessments to the MWRA. So the first thing that our office did was say we need to move up this schedule. Cities and towns need to know what they're going to pay next year. And we need a way that cities and towns are going to have a little cash flow relief, so that if they feel like it's appropriate for them to pass cash flow relief on to their ratepayers, they can do that, or they can stay solvent. So what we did was obviously reduce significantly the budget request that we'd received pre-COVID, and then also what we had done previously to work on behalf of one of our towns, which is the town of Stoneham. The communities involved in the MWRA can borrow money on an inflow and infiltration, which is sort of stormwater, or on the water side to upgrade their water mains, and they then repay the MWRA over time. So one of the things that we had done for a community previously, we re-implemented on a system-wide basis, which is a huge undertaking, which is to say anybody who needs immediate cash flow relief, you can defer your loan repayments for either of these loan programs until the end of the loan. So it's not just going to kick in right when COVID's over. It's essentially the same as a homeowner saying, if I could take my mortgage payments for the next year, not knowing how this will all play out, and just put them at the end with no penalty, would I do that? Yes, I would. Now, the other thing that I brought to the table with my municipal finance experience was to say, we need to make sure that towns are not going to be that S&P or Moody's or any of the bond rating agencies are going to throw this in the town's face and say, look, you couldn't pay your loans, and we're going to throw it in your face. So we had to make sure we went with the bond council. We took all, unturned every stone and make sure that everything had been covered, and towns could do this without any penalty. And it was sort of a two-step approach this year. And I think that's sort of what we do a lot in my office in my current role. Anything the cities and towns need, we're going to try to come up with a creative solution.
Great answers, thank you. How have you worked with the school department back in Danvers? Obviously, they have a school committee that handles their budgets, but as the chief financial officer of the town, how do you organize? Do you organize monthly meetings, or, obviously the school department budget is the largest entity, but there's statutory authorities, but obviously you would be working with the school department. How would you go about doing that?
So I think a lot of times that comes down to relationships. I would say that the town of Weston and the town of Danvers schools were handled very differently. In the town of Weston, the school was a siloed approach. There was very little interaction with town services. The facilities director was really the only area of town that was working for school and buildings. Otherwise, it was the schools did their own thing, and I would say that it probably was not the most efficient. Danvers, on the other hand, was very efficient. However, there were challenges with how efficient it was, right? So school buildings and town buildings were overseen by the same building staff, split, but economies of scale. The staff would move back and forth as needed. Facilities type things, DPW, worked very well together. And then the budget process was, the town manager and I would sit down with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent for finance, Keith DeVerna, and their superintendents, Lisa Dana, and the give and take was excellent. It was, and it's about honesty at some point too, which is to say, if you're able to remove this much from your request, every other service in town doesn't need to take a haircut that is unnecessary and is going to actually affect service level. And they would, the schools do often have creative ways to get things done through various grants that the towns just don't have. So it's a communication issue a lot, and it's a trust issue, right? If I say I'm going to do something in a conversation, the select board and the school committee have an agreement. It's about sticking to things, and those relationships build over time. So I would say that the challenges that came in Danvers because of the fact that everything was so split was when we were presenting a budget, it would be looking at the school budget and say, this is a very modest increase. Well, in reality, the DPW, under the DPW's budget was this big ask for facilities, and that's not getting reflected. And so the assistant superintendent and I, at the end of the year, because you have to legally show all of the costs of the school, you're reporting it to DESI. And so we would go through this very long process of reconstructing all of the deconstructed costs, and I think through that process too, it became very clear how much the town and schools were working together. I think that's pretty uncommon, but at the same time, I think that experience showed me sort of some of the areas where it just makes more sense, and it works better for the schools sometimes, but sometimes you just have to prove it to them, because everybody wants to be autonomous at some times. And they can often feel like if you're offering something, it's because you're trying to take something away. The only other thing I would say is that I was not involved in the collective bargaining with the teachers in Danvers. That's not how it was set up. I was involved with collective bargaining. Danvers is highly unionized. Even some of my accounting staff was unionized in Danvers. But the town did not get involved in the collective bargaining there. So it was more, again, communication. I'm talking to Keith because I need to know realistically where this is going to come out when a new CBA is going to be in place for the next fiscal year. I need to know realistically what to plan as I'm budgeting. I know in Holliston, the town administrator essentially votes on the contract but is not involved in the discussion. So
That's correct.
That would obviously be a conversation I'd be having with the select board.
Right. Okay, great. Second round of questioning, Tina?
Sure, yeah. So it looks on your resume that there was about a 6-month break in what you have listed here, January 2014 into January 2015. Do I have that correct? So you left the town of Weston January 2014, and then what comes up next on the resume is you started in the town of Danvers September of 2015?
No, I'm sorry. So I think the resume is not chronological. I grouped my experience at the MWRA Advisory Board together. So I left the town of Weston.
I thought the
see.
same
I
thing.
got
It's
it.
there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got
I'm
it.
sorry
There's no
about that.
break.
No problem.
I think if you view it on LinkedIn, it keeps it chronological. My experience at the MWRA Advisory Board was after Weston. And then through actually previous people that I had worked with in Weston who had gone to Danvers, I was recommended to be the finance director in Danvers.
Okay.
So I went there, and then when I moved to Wayland, my previous employer recruited me back.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So then I'm going to go to your training and credentials. You have 3 there that really stick out to me: the Supervisory Leadership Development Program, spring of 2016, the Leading Education Developing University of Virginia program in September of 2016, and then the PERAC Administrator Training in 2017. Can you just explain, explain your approach? Was this professional development? Was this personal development? Was this something you were asked to do when you were working where you were working at the time? Like, what does that lead to? Because now you're back at the MWRA.
Mhm.
And so can you just explain to me the benefit of those courses
Absolutely.
and how that directed you moving forward, and just big picture on that one?
Absolutely. So when I got to the town of Danvers, the most full-time employees I had managed directly had probably been 4. I walked into the town of Danvers, was managing 45 roughly across accounting, assessing, treasurer, collector, clerk, procurement, retirement staff. And so, I said very clearly to the town manager at the time, I'm comfortable doing this. I think I have management ability, but you're right, it's not in my background, so I'd be happy to do whatever you'd ask. The MMA and the Collins Center had a joint program that really focused on how to manage in a highly unionized environment, which Danvers was. Again, I had managed people at State Street. I had never managed unionized employees. It was a great program. It was, other town managers were there, but a lot of, DPW directors. It was a pretty wide range of people learning specifically challenges in Massachusetts, specifically challenges in a unionized environment. The program was great. It was relatively, I think it was 6 Fridays. It was, in a well-run program, and cost-effective to the town because it was put on by MMA, which offers, quite a few things to cities and towns. So that program was great, and it was sort of in response to something that was clear to the town manager and I that I needed to be prepared for as I entered Danvers. The lead program that was at the University of Virginia, I went down with, after I was hired, we hired a new assistant town manager, and she and I and a lieutenant who will probably be a police chief somewhere in the future. He's very good as their staff were, their forces, and so the 3 of us went down to that program, and that had a lot to do with the involvement of our town manager in ICMA. That's a program that was supported by the ICMA. He had been to a different iteration of it, and the lead program was sort of within an organization to support the things that he had brought there and he wanted to bring to Danvers. And the main purpose of that was not the same thing as the MMA, which was managing in a unionized environment. That was more finding a vision for the organization and working together to get to it, empowering employees to do that within the organization. So that was the focus of that one. When I went to Danvers also, the setup had been different. So PERAC is the overseeing body of retirement systems. They do a great job, but they rule with an iron fist as well occasionally. The outgoing town accountant in Danvers had been the ex officio member on the retirement system as his role as accountant. He had also been the administrator of the system considered by the town, appointed by the town manager, and he was voted chair, and PERAC said, we don't like that, don't do that. So when I got to Danvers, I was the administrator but not a voting member of the board. The town accountant was the ex officio member. and the chair became the former town manager, who was an appointee of the town manager. And so it was, because I've worked with boards, you know, the MWRA Advisory Board is a board, right? So I'm very comfortable working with boards. I didn't have a huge number of issues, but at the same time, I didn't want there to be any question of who is the administrator of the system, and is this person qualified enough. So I did the PARAC administrator training course. It was excellent. They talk about a lot of things that don't come up very often, but when they do, they're often huge issues for your employees. And they're usually at a time-sensitive thing when the employee is looking to retire. So it was an excellent course, and it was really to support that role.
Okay, thank you. 2 more questions, one quick, one maybe not. So this is a bit of a pivot question here. Please talk about how you would develop relationships with Holliston citizens and how you would use those relationships in the development of a master plan.
So I think one of the things I'm reticent about potentially being the town administrator of Holliston is coming in a COVID-19 environment where you just can't go around and shake everybody's hand. I almost had a handshaking incident as I walked in today. So that is something that I'm concerned about. That would be something that I would be very interested in doing right off the bat. I think my approach in the environment that we're in would be to start with the boards. There's a lot of boards in town. A lot of those meetings are now being held remotely, so that would be my first step in. I think to the question that you have about the master plan and what we discussed earlier is that it's a little bit of a different approach. I think one of the things I would like to see Holliston, you know, not the trap to not get stuck in with a master plan is to say, well, we have so many boards and we have so many opinions on those boards that those are the opinions we're going to take for our master plan. In reality, you do need to reach out to people who, for whatever reason, are not participating on the many boards, and that's probably going to be in a survey form. So while I may not be able to go out and shake hands, I think my approach would be to get ready for that process, which is going to need to be done before the master plan, to say, these are what, you know, there are obvious priorities that these boards have in place, but are there other things that we need to be considering that residents who, whether it's time restraints or whatever reason, are not involved, don't come to town meeting potentially. What are the other concerns? Now, we did that in Danvers, and generally the first thing that comes back is my taxes are too high. I don't like that the DPW knocked over my mailbox. But, you know, those are things that are going to come up, and you have to also be ready to take any feedback that you didn't know was coming. So that would probably be how I would have to go about it in a post-COVID-19 world.
Okay. The very last question here is a bit of a personal one. It's a fun one, I hope. In a perfect world, what would be your ideal mode of transportation to work?
I'd love to walk to work. I know some people say bicycles. I'm not a huge bicyclist, but you know, I think you know, if electric vehicles are the future, a short electric vehicle drive to work is certainly something I'd be interested in. Commuting to Boston I've done, and taking public transit, taking my vehicle. None of them are that fun in Boston, so I think that's also one of the reasons, you know, proximity to work and, you know, where I am in Wayland, I think Holliston makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you.
John?
Just a quick heads up, she's a big bicycle person, so just
I have many bicycle
It's
friends.
right outside.
Yeah, it's
Many of my
Right.
friends do the PMC. I've just never got into it.
Oh, no, I'm not an athlete. I just like riding on my bike.
A couple of questions, Travis. Regarding support staff, if you become our town administrator, what kind of skills would you be looking to surround yourself and complement yourself with?
So I don't know that there's specific skills that I would be looking for. I think one of the things that I think is you need to evaluate what people are bringing to the table, and sometimes there are deficiencies in the way that an individual you know, approaches things. I think, you know, for example, in the many leadership courses, they make you take the Myers-Briggs and all those things. And I think what I like to do is just make sure that anybody has the ability, if it's because they're an introvert, that they're not great at public speaking, well, you know, is there a way that what they are bringing to the table is able to shine through? You can't just say, well, if you can't public speak, we don't have a place for you, right? So you have to be sort of, you have to work with people, and I think that's one of the things that I try to do. Is there a specific skill set? My approach has always been, I'd rather you be honest with me. I'm going to be honest
Let me
with
flip the question a different
Sure.
way. If you had to announce what your weaknesses were, would you be looking to complement your staff with those strengths, with those missing pieces? For example, if you were a strong finance person, do you surround yourself with staff who are more project-related, or something along that line? Is that something you've had to build? Is that something you've put some thought into?
Right. I'm trying to think. I think I've got along and work well with a variety of what people are bringing to the table. I think in reality, I do get hyper sort of laser focused on some things, and it's nice when people can bring you out of that. At the same time, I like big picture thinkers, but you need people in the weeds. I think it's a mix. And I think I'm able to do both, but just not at the same time. And sometimes you need people who I think you need people who are going to tell you when you need to take a step back. I think you need people who are always going to be willing to tell you the truth, whether you agree with it or not,
Right.
and not shy away from that. Confrontation is sometimes it's not necessary, but a lot of times you need confrontation to get to where you're going.
Sure. Travis, you've never been a town administrator or an assistant town administrator. Are you concerned about what you don't know, and how would you go about gaining the knowledge?
I think one of the things that I do have is through my experience in the town of Weston and Danvers is a very wide variety of now what I consider to be very good friends and colleagues in the field. The town manager of Danvers is a friend of mine, and one I wait on heavily when considering whether or not to apply to this and through this process. I think there are things that I don't know, but I'm not afraid to ask anybody for information, for help, for any of those types of things, and I have no reticence to freely admit things that I don't know. I think the things that I don't know generally in a municipal government setting are things that I would consider that the town would have expertise in, and I would be asking questions of that, and if I felt that I needed to be up to speed, then I would be getting up to speed as quickly as possible.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have one last question, but I'll wait until you're done, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Your relationship with the select board, can you describe the relationship that you envision for working with the Holliston Select Board? What would you consider to be your ideal working relationship with the board?
So the Monday night meetings, obviously, and preparation for that, I think, would be a lot of getting to know, specifically what people want. To being prepared for those meetings, I think, is probably paramount, especially in the beginning. And then going forward, I think the relationship would be making sure that any items that come up to the board, correspondence offline when the cameras aren't rolling, and anything that comes up in the meetings is being tracked accurately over time, so nothing's getting dropped. Other than that, I think I would always be looking potentially for any new ideas that may come from staff or from residents to seeing the interest of the board in pursuing those types of things. And it's really the types of issues that come up in a town are going to change every year based on the needs of residents, but also external forces as well. And it's really just an issue of communication within open meeting law and all those types of things. But being prepared for the public speaking portion of it, and supporting anything that the board obviously is looking to do or steer Holliston in, and outside of that, making sure that communication and the needs of residents is getting to the board. If those things are coming up but not being relayed directly to the board, would being the intermediary there.
Okay. Your relationship with the Finance Committee, how do you envision that relationship working with that committee?
So, in general, I think they seem to meet more than I'm accustomed to, but that's the way they choose to operate, I think is fine. I think my approach specific to the budget, I'll start there, and if you'd like me to extrapolate, I can. But I think one of the things that is being done, but I would just make more clear, is that there's a 5-step budget process in Holliston as there is in other towns, which is that department requests come in for the budget. they go to the town administrator, the budget needs to be balanced in a way that, if there's new service requests or potential service cuts, that's then being, level 2, the town administrator budget is going to the level 3, the select board, and then level 4 is the finance committee, and level 5 is the final authority, which is town meeting. And as long as that's being tracked and everybody's everybody's in tune, and the documentation of that process from 1 through 5, from department head request through the town administrator, the select board, the finance committee, and the town meeting is clear to everybody. I think that that's that would be my goal, is to make sure that you're comfortable with how the process is going, keeping them apprised as they're approaching the step that they're involved in, and then making sure that the town meeting is aware that these steps took place, everything has been vetted, and at the end of the day, if you disagree with either board, it's your right as town meeting to do what you feel is best.
Right. And having the process like that is bringing transparency
Yes.
for the residents, which is very important. So,
And I think if you document it very well, I think you can also see that sometimes there's going to be a disagreement, right? The select board budget may not look exactly as what I presented to you, but why is that, right? It's probably a good reason. Something's changed in the process. You would like to prioritize something else. If they choose to then also make changes, why is that? What specifically has changed? What is the reason? And then the final body can make the decision with all of that information.
right, exactly. Mrs. Hine, one or two last questions.
Oh, I wasn't thinking I was going to I was waiting to hear
Well,
what.
we have a few more minutes,
John's
so I'm
was.
going to let you have one more question.
Okay, so how is Holliston different from, well, you know what, actually, I'm going to back up. When arriving at Town Hall today for this interview, and when you were in town, you've been in town before for the screening committee interviews, or that was done by Zoom?
That was Zoom.
Okay. So then, when arriving at Town Hall today for this interview, what struck you most about your commute through town, either positive or negative or both?
I think I had covered with the screening committee as well, that my wife and I had actually driven through prior to that conversation, just to, we had been obviously through for the home search. That was a very different, keeping your eyes out. This time I was, I'm coming in west on 16, so immediately you're going by the 2 industrial parks. In terms of the way the position statement had been posted, looking for economic development, passing the company that sells play structures, because we're in the market personally, and then coming into Town Hall, which is in the downtown area. We reacquainted ourselves with I think a house that we had looked at, and really the other side of town, the 495 side, I'm not as familiar with. So what struck me again, and I think I mentioned the screening committee, was it's great that Holliston views itself as a residential sort of a sleepy bedroom community. Those are the types of key phrases. But I think that there is a relatively good mix if you are comparing yourself to some other towns in the area, and I think that is going to afford you, right. The businesses are going to potentially go towards where other businesses are thriving, and so you're set up well for that. But what drove my family and I here to look was the things that the small town feel, the recreation, the open space, those types of things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Travis, my last question. I'm mindful that with this interview that to some similar extent you're interviewing us. How did we do tonight? Do you have any questions for us?
I will say that this is not the first time I've seen you. I've seen you pre-COVID and post-COVID, and I've seen you interact on just thinking and those types of things. So these are the questions that I think I was expecting, and certainly I was prepared for, and I would be happy certainly to work for you. And I think the only thing I'm remiss in realizing now that we didn't really get to is sort of my state role and my state relationships that I would be bringing to the town in regard to I think I mentioned this is screening committee as well. The town of Holliston is very well set up at the moment with your representation at the State House between Rep. Dykema and the Senate President, And my familiarity and my I'm no stranger to the State House. That I would be remiss if I didn't bring that to the table as well. But no, I think all of the things that you've brought here today, certainly I was comfortable with this group from having seen you. The only thing I would prefer was that you could see my face, because I've already
know,
seen
huh?
yours, but that's about it.
Yeah.
I don't know how my dry sense of humor
So
plays with
no
that.
questions for us, essentially? Nothing that
I did have one question, which was sort of, I think the vision of Holliston, if you were to answer what the question of vision of Holliston is, do you think that it would be the same as, for example, the Finance Committee or another committee? And is that, in your mind, something that needs to be addressed before undertaking a master plan?
That's a phenomenal question, actually.
We did have a vision committee meeting before the COVID situation, and we had planned to have more, but unfortunately it kind of hurt the process. But that is important to have a vision committee, so that when you do start to formulate a master plan, you've got all this vision work that you've done with players, but you also need to vet it with the public. So it is a process to have a vision for a town, and I agree that should be done first before a master plan.
Good.
It'd take about another hour to answer your question, but in short, yes. I think town of Holliston needs a vision at this point. It's been about 20 years since the last master plan was done, I think, something like that, Mike? And at that time, it was a different vision. We were going to go head-on into sewage, and it was going to change everything.
Right.
Didn't happen. So we're back to what we've always been, and I think looking forward, personally, I see a renewed interest in redefining our infrastructure, improving it for both pedestrians, motorists, and so forth. Water is a big issue in Holliston, Travis, so our improvements have to center around that as well. We don't oversee the schools, but we're very mindful that schools are one of our most important assets. Mark asked a great question earlier. We shouldn't overlook the fact that as the seat of government, we still impact the schools in many ways, and we want to support what they do, because ultimately that's our best investment. So overall, there's work to be done on a master plan and a vision, but personally, I'd see horizontal infrastructure as being a big, huge part of that.
So thank you very
I think
much.
Tina had some contribution. But
You want what's the?
I think you hit on some key, I think you've picked up from your time in Holliston on a couple different occasions, you've picked up on some of our key strengths, so I'm glad to hear you acknowledge those and recognize those, the small town community feel, the open space and recreation and so on. I think, to answer your question, that the dialogue needs to start. So to ask whether or not everyone's on the same page is an unknown. I'm not sure, to Mark's comments about the need to start having vision conversations, I think we have a lot of work to do among boards and committees, but also with the public to establish that dialogue and get it going. So I can't answer that question for you. I think in terms of my sense of where the community is, there's trepidation of what the future brings. We see a changing world around us in many, many different ways: transportation, the economy, the environment, and growth, and so on. And I think people see that coming, have experienced some of it, and have some trepidation, and are looking for leadership that will capture the best and address the not so good. I think that people perceive that change is happening within government in town, locally and nationally, and they want to see change. So I think that this is a great time to bring a new town administrator into the town of Holliston. And so I hope you're extremely excited. You sound like you are. I know that among the three of us, I can speak for all three of us, we're very excited to have this going underway, even though the pandemic has made life seem a little bit uncertain and scary. This is a very much excited process we're going through.
I know it is scary, and I would just, some optimism. It's sort of a pause in some regards to local and state government. It's a matter of maintaining at the moment. But I think that's a perfect time to be planning, and I think that's a huge reason that this position obviously is going to be very important to setting the tone of where the town wants to go when the pause is hopefully ending. and be prepared for when, money starts to flow from the state to drive the economy back on track. So I think Holliston just needs to be ready for that, and those conversations need to happen so that you're ready.
Great. Well, Travis, thank you very much
Thank you.
for coming out.
I'll shake
Travis.
all your hands, but
And
Just shake Chris's. He's okay with it.
And obviously, one of the 3 finalists, quite impressive resume and all the rest, so it was very nice to meet you. We're going to be meeting Monday night to talk about the 3 candidates, and we may even choose somebody that night based on the interviews and so forth. But thank you.
well, if
very
there's anything
much.
you need from me, obviously Bernie can get it. And
Excellent.
I'd be happy to provide anything you need.
Have a
And
great weekend.
at some point, we
Thanks,
will
Thanks,
shake your
Travis.
hand.
Shake hands and see our
Somebody
faces.
show us their smile if you want. I feel like you.
No, that's all right.
Aw.
I don't want to break the rules.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Thank you
know.
so much.
Take
All
care.
right. Bye bye.
It is sad you can't shake hands, isn't it? With people that coming to see you,
We disinfect the chair, Chief, or?
Okay. I don't know if candidate 2 is here, Gregory, but if he is, you could bring him in.
Just do it. There we go.
Seltzer.
I think I got some water too. Not here yet? Okay. Anybody gonna use the restroom or anything?
Yeah, why don't we take a 5-minute break?
Let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, welcome back. It's 5:10. We're going to resume with the second candidate, Thomas Gregory.
Hi,
Come on
Tom.
in, Tom.
Hello, Thomas.
Have a seat.
Tom or Thomas? Good evening.
How are you? So, we'll let you do an intro. Tell us about yourself.
Sure.
Some of your history, and then our board clerk, Tina, will ask some questions, and then our vice chair, John, will ask questions, then I will, and then we'll have a second round of questions.
Very good.
All right?
Okay, well,
So,
first,
floor is yours.
very good. So first, let me thank you all for giving me this opportunity to be with you here tonight. It's an honor to be considered a finalist for this position. I'm very excited about it. I left a teaching career maybe 8 or 9 years after college with a real desire to move into public service, into local government. I took my first position in 2006 with the city manager's office, neighborhood development in Worcester. And about 1 year later, I was faced with a very similar period of upheaval and uncertainty, much like we're going through right now. I was managing some federal CDBG funding for homeless assistance, housing rehab, and economic development initiatives with various neighborhoods in the city. And then I was tapped by the city manager in 2009 to lead a homelessness initiative implementing about $5 million of federal MWRA funding, stimulus funding, to make some real system design changes in the homelessness service delivery programs in Worcester. Very exciting, very difficult work, very meaningful work. And then the opportunity came up in Shrewsbury to really transition to municipal management. I worked 4 years in Shrewsbury as the assistant to the town manager, really assisting the town manager in every aspect of local government. It was a real privilege to learn from him. He's retired now, a senior manager at the time, who really gave me a chance to be exposed to all aspects of local government. I staffed the finance committee. I got very involved with personnel work. I did a lot of statistical analysis, financial analysis of various programs, and it really got me excited about that kind of work. And then the position in Walpole opened up, which was a wonderful opportunity for me to be given the lead on some real substantial building projects. I work closely with the Capital Committee, Personnel Board in Walpole, but I would say 70 to 80% of my job was managing a new fire station, a new senior center, and a new police station. 2 of those buildings were sited on a Superfund site, so I really got some real in-depth experience in remediation projects. And very meaningful experience for me in Walpole. And then the position in Spencer opened up about 2.5 years ago, and it's just been very exciting. A good job managing a $25 million budget. A lot of the smaller towns in the Commonwealth, especially west of Worcester, the town administrator handles, sort of given the staffing levels, a lot of the responsibilities. And it's been a great fit for me. I've been able to be selective as I search for my next job, and I'm happy to get into more detail with you.
Great. Tina?
Sure. Nice to meet you, Tom. You're described by others as having a strong moral compass. What does that mean to you, and can you provide an example of when you needed to act or make a decision, a recent experience when you need to act or make a decision guided by your morals?
Sure. I try very hard to model what I demand, what I expect from others. I learned that when I was a teacher, and I've learned that in public service. I think it's important for people, for colleagues, for the public, for boards and committees, to know who you are and have a sense of who you are and trust that you're doing the right thing all the time and doing the right thing on behalf of the community you serve. So I've tried very hard to be consistently transparent, consistently honest with folks, to build that trust with them. A good example of, I think a good example that comes to mind, the senior, a recent experience, it's ongoing now in Spencer, the senior center in Spencer over the number of years has been sort of a stepchild in the organization, has been moved around, lack of funding for a new building, and it's been moved around. And before I arrived in Spencer, a year before I arrived, they moved into an old elementary school, and a code review wasn't done, unfortunately. And as it turns out, after I arrived, I had asked my building inspector to walk through the building and make sure things were proper. It came, after the inspection, it came to light that the building needs to be sprinkled. A substantial project in a small town. And no one really wanted to hear it. And I couldn't abrogate my responsibility as the town administrator to turn the other way. And so I had to carry out this project, this code compliance project, in the face of quite a bit of opposition from seniors and from others in the community that didn't want to be going down that path, that thought that the funding could be better spent elsewhere, and they really, and many of them wanted me to look the other way. And I knew that that was the wrong thing. And so it was very, very challenging, very hard to be making what I thought, and still think, is the right decision in the face of quite a bit of flack from people. There were many in favor of it, but there was a good segment of the public that thought it's the wrong decision and waste of money. That's the example that comes to mind.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you share some examples of your approach for motivating and evaluating employees and how you handle the maintenance of staff morale?
Sure. I try very hard to empower my employees. I see myself as a town administrator. I see myself as very much a facilitator. I want, I feel comfortable in the role that I have, and I want my staff to feel comfortable, to feel confident in their abilities. I try very hard to empower them, to back them up, to give them opportunities to speak before the public. This very much played out in the past 2 to 3 months during the COVID pandemic. I have a new health agent, somewhat reticent, somewhat shy, and I really tried to get her feeling comfortable about talking to the public, talking to the selectmen about what's going on during this really challenging time. So I try to give direct feedback. I try to be consistent with my feedback. I try to, as I said earlier, I try to model what I demand so that people know that I deliver with what I promise, and I expect the same from employees. So it's a lot about communication, being consistent with people,
Okay.
I would say.
You've been involved with the procurement and administration of health insurance for employees in the town of Spencer, as your resume speaks to that. Can you describe some of your experiences with this aspect of your role, and did you bring any changes to this employee benefit during your time as town administrator?
The health insurance situation in Spencer is very stable. We're with a large, with Maya, a large trust. So I didn't bring many changes on the health insurance side. I did, however, make some substantial changes on the general insurance side. The town had been with an insurer for some time, and I think what tends to happen sometimes, if it's not being watched routinely, premiums can creep up, and all of a sudden you end up paying more than you really ought to, and that became very evident when I put out to bid the town's general insurance coverages, and we saved a substantial amount of money. And I've been able, the bids came in after I had had presented the budget to the finance committee for town meeting, and after the board had signed the warrant. So I wasn't able to realize the savings in last year's budget, but I was able to do some mid-year transfers out of the surplus there that freed up reliance on free cash at the end of the year, which helped our capital program. So I'm happy that there was a great savings realized.
Okay. Can you explain or talk about your experience with capital planning?
Sure. When I was serving as the assistant in Walpole, one of my lead responsibilities, as I said earlier, was managing carefully the capital budget committee, which is required by their charter to review and approve any expenditures over $10,000, very similar as it is in Spencer, actually. And the capital programming involved close work with department heads and involved bringing committee members out to look at vehicles, look at buildings, do walkthroughs, and to be strategic. There was a 5-year plan in Walpole that was very good. I actually adopted that when I came to Spencer, and it was very well received, I think, because there was no real long-term or medium to long-term capital planning going on in Spencer. It was just, something breaks and you fix it, or building the roof's leaking and we can't do anything until next year, and there was quite a bit of deferred maintenance in Spencer, and it all comes down to funding, available funds. I'm proud of what I was able to bring to Spencer from my experience in Walpole to really get the selectmen, get the finance committee looking at long-term capital needs. It's just so critical.
Okay. Last question before I turn it over. Holliston's unique in that it's a recipient of several grants related to climate change and green communities. Over the past few years, what is your experience with reducing the carbon footprint of the communities you have worked in?
Sure. Sustainability is important to me personally in my own life, and it's important to me as I carry out my duties as town administrator. I can point to a couple examples. Shortly after I arrived in Spencer, I was handed a project that was midway through completion. It was a 3 megawatt solar installation that was being sited at the time on our closed landfill, and I was able to bring the project full to completion, which realizes a tremendous amount of new revenue to the town in the form of a lease payment. This is with Citizens Energy and with the pilot agreement that I negotiated with Citizens. We just implemented or just received our Green Communities designation, which I initiated when I first arrived in Spencer, and it was a good 18-month haul to get from sort of baseline to getting that designation in the $160,000 designation grant that we received. I'm very proud of that. And the town has been very much a participant in the governor's MVP grant program, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Initiative. We participated in a planning grant when I arrived that was ongoing, and I jumped in when I arrived. And then I kept it going so that we could apply for an action grant, and we were able to receive about $400,000 in grant funding to implement a new parking lot right in our downtown.
This is Spencer.
In Spencer, right in Spencer, on-site stormwater infiltration. The grant funding supported the design and construction. It's a big win, big project in a densely kind of congested area of downtown. Very proud of that project.
Thank you.
John?
Hi, Tom. Nice to meet you. Over the last 15 years, you've had 6 positions, including the one you're in currently. You were in that position for 2 years when you applied for this job. Why do you wish to leave Spencer and come to Holliston, and how can we be assured you'll be around here for a while?
It's a good question. As I said earlier, I'm in a good situation in Spencer right now. This particular job I'm really excited about, and I have the ability now to be a little bit picky in my sort of, as I said earlier, as I look out toward a career path in local government. I'm very excited about this opportunity. I'm excited about the financial stability of this town. It's clearly a well-managed town. I'm excited about the level of citizen engagement in this town. It's something that, based on my research, is quite a bit different than what I experienced in Spencer. I'd be very excited to be working with the various boards and committees, a little bit of a different form of government here than that I have out in Spencer. And if I'm selected, I can give you the assurance that I would stay with over a long period of time. I can say that with full confidence.
You indicated that in Spencer, as part of your duties, you prepare and execute a $25 million annual operating budget, including water and sewer enterprise funds. Does that include schools, by the way?
No, there's a regional school district, Spencer East Brookfield Regional School District.
Okay. Do you prepare that on your own? Do you have a staff that does it for you? What do you do with the prepared document? Can you tell us a little bit about the details?
Sure. The budget preparation is handled exclusively by me. I work with departments gathering their requests. I sit with department heads, talk about their various needs. I assemble the budget document. I adjust it over the course of the budget development season. I work with the finance committee. They have a real input in the budget as well, less so than I'm detecting here in Holliston. But it's a process that I shepherd through from the beginning to the end, all the way to town meeting. Once we get into December, January, I start really looking at revenue and expense trends for each of the departments, looking to see if there's any concerns that I need to start talking to the Board of Selectmen about. And then I issue 2 fiscal projections. I issue one fiscal projection in early February, which is by charter I'm required to. And then I issue a second fiscal projection later in the budget cycle. In a typical year, it would be mid-March.
Excuse me, has Spencer had its town meeting yet for FY21?
No, so the Board of Selectmen, at my recommendation, postponed the town meeting, the town meeting until June 30th.
June 30th.
And we have our 1/12 budget authorization as a contingency.
Just curious, what are you looking at for a total aid, local aid cut for next year?
That is the question.
Your budget must be in the can by now.
Well, I mean, it's if I had the answer to that question,
all right.
very, and I can comment on that question because it's critical right now because we're all sort of flying blind as the ground shifts under our feet. Very, very difficult. The Board of Selectmen has given me a lot of discretion, a lot of given me the confidence to give them recommendations. And that's what they are at the end of the day. The board can go in a different direction. It's my best recommendation, my best analysis.
So what'd you tell them?
So I told them that I said I'd like the board to use the pre-COVID governor's number that was issued in January with the caveat that, and I've been public about this consistently, that we turn around in late summer and make the adjustment at a special town meeting. I just concluded the successor agreements with my collective bargaining agreements. I didn't want to create a situation where those would be funded, and let's say the non-union personnel weren't funded with the cost of living adjustments. I thought that would create a bad dynamic. So it's I'm going with the pre-COVID governor's number.
Last question on this round, Mr. Chairman. I have 4 categories. I'd like you to rank the following from the strongest, in your personal opinion, to the least strongest, if you will, or
Okay.
weakest. Project management, administrative management, financial, and communication skills. Which one's your strongest?
I would put financial management and project management at the very top.
Well, you got to pick one.
Okay, I would say financial management, project management, communication, and jog my memory on the
Administrative management.
Administrative management.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm all set.
Great, thank you. Tom, it mentions in your resume about compensation and reclassification plan that required a great deal of research regarding comparable communities. Can you tell us about that, the plan that you came up with?
Sure. When I was the assistant to the town manager in Shrewsbury, a lot of the work that I was delegated was around personnel management. And I spent a lot of time managing the town's personnel bylaw and doing routine salary checks, salary surveys. We hired a consultant toward the end of my term there to do a full study of the non-union employees. I'm always sort of looking to see what positions are paying, to see where my organization stands relative to the labor market. I think that's a critical piece of retaining good employees, attracting and retaining good employees who know that, look, if I come to work at the town of Spencer or the town of Holliston, I'm being paid properly. I'm being paid what the labor market properly would compensate this position at. So a lot of the personnel work, a lot of the personnel management falls in my current role to me. I don't have an HR director. I have an assistant who's terrific. She's stretched thin, so a lot of the analysis, the survey work is left to me. And I did a lot of that work also with especially with my police union, doing comparable checks during the process of negotiating the successor agreements.
Great. It shows that you've had some economic development experience. In Holliston, we have about 14% commercial revenue, which is a little on the low side compared to other communities. Can you tell us about your economic development projects you've done and what you think you can bring to Holliston?
Sure. When I arrived in Spencer, one of my first tasks given to me by the board was to do something about the vacant buildings in the downtown area. Spencer is has a little bit of a distressed downtown. It's been that way for some number of years. So I drafted a new general bylaw which implemented a vacant building registry that's now enforceable. A lot of my focus in Spencer has been with the downtown area. A lot of resources have been brought to bear to make some substantial improvements in the downtown. I'm very proud of a project that I took on when I first arrived in Spencer. It was the disposition of a big brick 4-story building that the town's owned since the 1890s. And towns were notoriously bad landlords, and such was the case in Spencer. And an ad hoc committee was formed by the selectmen to RFP the building, and we got a developer to come who's going to be building out. It's under construction now. 14 units of senior housing on the upper 2 floors, and expanded commercial space on the first floor, with a bump out area in our downtown, which is a newly created green space. A very, very exciting project, a project that was tried over many years. At the time, the economy was, the stars aligned for me, largely. But it's something that I pushed hard. It was an initiative of the selectmen's. Other efforts in our downtown, we have a great partnership with the Massachusetts Downtown Initiative. We've secured 2 $15,000 grants, one for a downtown parking study, the other for a downtown design guidelines document. I have a great relationship with the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission. They've assisted the town with some brownfields, phase 1 studies and some strategic parcels in our downtown. The town is a complete streets town. We have a policy that's been in place before I arrived. And we've tried to continue to make pedestrian and bicycle improvements, access improvements in the downtown. The federal CDBG program, which I have extensive background with from my time in the city of Worcester, brings quite a bit of money to bear in Spencer, given the town's socioeconomic profile. We've been able to pave some streets using CDBG funds, sidewalks, all trying to concentrate resources in our downtown. One of the efforts I have underway right now is an attempt to try to create a downtown merchants district with some statutory authority to do some real substantial things. We have a good EDC, but we're looking to sort of take it up a notch. And I noticed that Holliston has recently passed home rule petition to do something similar. So it's always, the focus is always there, especially in our downtown.
Yeah.
We changed our zoning bylaws recently also to allow microbrewery tasting rooms in our downtown, trying to attract a business in that growing industry. So those are very, exciting projects I have ongoing in Spencer.
Sounds very exciting. Your relationship with the select board, can you describe the relationship that you envision that you'd like to have?
The relationship that I'd like to have?
Mm-hmm.
I would like to have what I have right now, which is a respectful, collegial, supportive relationship. I have a good rapport with the board right now in Spencer. They give me and have given me quite a bit of latitude to work up recommendations. I know that they're pleased that I give them various options when studying a particularly difficult problem. There's always an option B and option C to think about with a price tag attached. So I look for and would hope for a respectful, collegial relationship.
Right. Your relationship with the finance committee, can you describe the relationship that you envision? And what would you think would be ideal working relationship with that committee?
Well, one thing I've in my research, one thing I've noticed is I recently read the Holliston's Finance Committee's June 3rd press release. I thought it was very, very well written, very thoughtful about thinking ahead to what's coming in the months ahead. And reading that document really got me thinking about it. Speaks volumes because it tells me clearly that the Finance Committee here is very, very engaged. I understand they're elected, which is a different structure than what I have. But it tells me that they're engaged, they're thoughtful, they're very active in discussions. That kind of jumps off the paper when I read that press release. In Spencer, I'm treated to a wonderful group of people. They're extremely deferential, very, very much passive, though, and I don't, and it's just that I don't know if that's the tradition in Spencer. They're very deferential. There's very little sort of questions that are brought to me, and while that's nice, on the one hand, it would be nice to be in a more engaged dynamic. I had that in Walpole when I was the assistant, the Walpole Finance Committee, very, very, very engaged, somewhat adversarial. Again, so back to your question, I would look for the same relationship, one built on trust, a collegial relationship. I don't mind the tough questions, and I welcome the tough questions. It keeps me honest, it keeps me learning, it keeps me doing my job. So while on the one hand I love the deferential experience I've had, I would welcome what I foresee as a very active, an active dialogue, which gets me very excited, to be honest.
Great. Second round of questions. Tina.
Sure. So can you describe your process for determining comparable communities for Spencer? You mentioned in terms of employee benefits and salaries and retaining qualified, skilled employees in the town of Spencer. You did work to develop what sounds like a comparable community list. Can you just describe how you went? Go ahead if you need a drink.
Okay.
Yeah, I can wait. Take your time. Can you just describe your process for how you developed that comparable community list?
Sure. What I looked at is, excuse me,
Certainly.
operating budget, land size, road miles, what other factors? Other financial factors, aside from operating budget, I'm trying to recall. Population size was largely the driven, one of the drivers, a form of government. So there were about we use in Spencer, we use about 7 or 8 other comparable communities, and they're not always going to line up exactly. So the benefit to using a sort of a swath of different communities that are close is that in the aggregate you get what you look for, because it ends up being the labor market for that area. And they're all sort of within, I would say, within 15 or 20 miles or so of the town.
Okay. And then, so you describe what sounds like a pretty strong focus for your work in Spencer. So you describe downtown redevelopment, solar projects, you describe work on Superfund sites, on complete streets, on MVP programs, grants, and so on. Why this focus of your work in Spencer? What drove that? You mentioned being proud of your accomplishments in these areas. Can you just describe why you focused in those areas, why that was important to you?
Well, first, I enjoy working in those areas, so I get up and enjoy coming to work generally, and I love my job. I especially love the areas that you described, you mentioned, because I personally see the value in the work at hand. In other words, I'm not going through the motions. I see, professionally and personally, I see the value to making investments in green infrastructure. I see the value in investing in long-term in assets and capital assets. Money spent now is, if it's available, is better than deferring those obligations out into the future for another generation to handle. Trying to change the landscape for the better in the downtown, which has some real issues, some grinding poverty. People live there, and when I get up in the morning, I know that I'm working towards making people's lives, helping to make people's lives better. So it's something that I fulfill as a town administrator, but personally, I derive a lot of personal satisfaction out of carrying out those jobs, those activities.
And I'll ask this question of everybody, I guess, just because, again, it seems like a fun one. In a perfect world, what would be your ideal mode of transportation to work?
Oh, maybe we could fly like the Jetsons. No. Ideal. I had a chance to spend some time in Portland, Oregon. This is after college. I did a year of volunteer work out there. A very progressive, forward-looking city. And I remember thinking, this is a number of years ago, I remember thinking that there was established a light rail network in Portland that I remember and I still think about as a really incredible means to connect people across a modern grid, a modern design city. And I still think about that a lot. If New England has its own physical characteristics, and cities have their own, towns have their own roads that were cow paths from 200 years ago. But any way to create enhancements around rail like that, I think is money well spent. Any ways to enhance bicycle and walking in urban areas, walking paths and trails is money well spent. I love driving my car, but we all know the reliance on motor vehicles, especially as we look at the cities like Boston and other large cities. It just becomes more and more difficult, more and more congested.
Okay. Thank you.
John?
A couple of questions for you, Tom. Between your experience in Walpole and in Spencer, did you ever prepare a capital item for town meeting debt override?
I have not. No, I have not. In fact, in Walpole, and this is credit that the town administrator there should take and does deservedly take. The buildings, it was a $10 million police station, $14 million fire station, $7.5 million senior center. were all funded within the levy limit, believe it or not. It's a real accomplishment that was involved some planning. So I haven't, so to answer your question, and I haven't in Spencer either, I'll tell you, in Spencer in 2016, before I arrived, town meeting authorized $19 million in a comprehensive roadway improvement system. That was a debt exclusion authorization in 2016. I have now issued overseen the issuance of three three phases of that. I just was on the call last week with Moody's to issue our third phase of funding to do substantial improvements throughout the town, culverts, bridges, roads. That was all effort, the planning effort all was behind me before I got there.
Sure. What's the Spencer's bond rating?
AA3.
Okay.
So AA3, I understand Holliston is within reach of the AAA status, which is very exciting.
When you think about this job, if you were to get it,
Yeah.
tell me what you're going to do within the first week.
Sure. So in the first week, if I'm hired, I would try my best to get face-to-face with folks, given it will be a challenge, but given the circumstances. But getting to meet people, getting to know them.
What about the first month?
The first month, I'd be researching, I'd be reading, I'd be working closely with the selectmen to sort out the priorities. In the environment right now, it will be looking closely at the budget, looking closely at your budget.
When you look back after 1 year, what would you have hoped to have accomplished?
Looking back in 1 year's time, I would hope that the environment next year has stabilized, and I would hope that I would have a role in helping that happen for Holliston. It's a very difficult time to start a new job, obviously, that goes without saying. But it's worth saying because I would commit to bringing my best recommendations to the town. And
How will you know if you're successful?
well, if a budget is passed successfully that aligns revenue and resources to demands, there's a success right there. If I'm here for that, I understand Holliston's town meeting has been pushed out to July 20th. If I am hired and arrive sometime after that, I would hope to be sure that the spending plan does indeed align with the resources that were matched to it. That would be my goal. And looking back in a year's time to make sure, if I'm looking back next June to see that we close fiscal '21 in solid form, I'd be pleased. I say to myself, that's an accomplishment for the town.
Very well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I reserve the right to ask that last question.
Absolutely,
When we're wrapped
yeah,
up,
that's
if you
a
don't
good
mind.
last question.
Sure,
yes.
when you be ready.
Can you tell us about master planning and visioning for the town? We had a vision committee meeting, and then the virus came, and
Right.
we had planned to have a few more meetings to get the vision going, and then we're going to have some public input, and then, start to contemplate a master plan, which, hasn't been done in 20 years. So can you tell us your experiences with master plans and how you would go about it to help the town? Bless you.
Sure. I was involved. So Spencer's master plan is outdated by about 15 years. So we're in a similar situation. We have made progress in the past 6 to 8 months or so toward renewing our open space and recreation plan, which is one component of the master plan, along with housing and some other components. When I was in Shrewsbury, I had a supporting role helping to renew their master plan. I have funding appropriated in Spencer, $75,000 funded, half from free cash, half from planning board revolving, to hire a consultant to start the process in Spencer. So we're in a very similar situation. I'll tell you that in Spencer, not unlike Holliston, there are some beautiful open spaces that the residents carefully watch and guard. Some of the most beautiful rolling hills with sort of, farmland that you could imagine. And the issue right now, the number one issue in the town, is large-scale utility solar development. And it's been the issue, and it will be one of the primary issues in the open space plan as well as the master plan. What does the community want to see? So on the one hand, we struggle with the finances. Solar revenue brings in annually about $350,000 in revenue to the town through tax agreements. But on the other hand, the deliberation, the policy discussion is, how do you preserve the open space? So the selectmen got behind an ad hoc, they formed an ad hoc solar advisory bylaw committee to look at this process. And a lot of that work will inform the master plan around the use of open space, because it's a subject that's, it's the number one issue in town. So it's, while we haven't started the master plan, those discussions about the use of open space has already started.
Great. Do you have one more question, Tina?
I do not. I will defer to
Okay,
John.
John has one more question.
Tom, we're mindful that with this interview today, that you're also interviewing us. So I'd like to know, how did we do? And do you have any questions for us?
Sure. Well, I enjoyed my time here very much. I thought the questions were great questions, and I appreciate talking about my experiences. I guess my biggest concern, or not concern, but one of my biggest concerns is how engaged is the local business community here in town. When I read through the material and I looked on the EDC website, by the way, I was very impressed with the permanent guide that I saw. Very, very impressive. I couldn't quite glean, I mean, I sort of could, but not fully, how engaged the local business community is, because I think that's so critical
Right.
to a town's success.
Do you want me to take a stab at that? I'd say there's room for improvement. There is obviously a Holliston Business Association, and they're active. There's not a lot of business in town, so the ones that are, active are heard from occasionally. I wouldn't say it's an organized group that comes in here on any cyclical basis and makes input to our board, but we're mindful that it's a significant part of the economy that needs to grow. We need to care and feed it properly to make sure it has the opportunity to do so. But I would say there's room for improvement. So that's my take.
Okay.
I think you're right. I think there's need for improvement, and I think the virus kind of tampens that sort of activity that you would expect
Right.
Sure.
from meetings and things.
Yeah.
So let's hope that we can get back to some sort of semblance of normalcy.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But then, like I said, Tom, the ones that you do hear from, once a week we hear from certain businesses that donate and are actively involved in the care of our community, and it's very heartening to see that.
Yeah.
There are certain very significant business owners in this town who are committed to being here on both a business level and a good citizenry level too.
That's excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we want to thank you for coming to see us tonight, Tom. Obviously, you're one of the 3 top finalists, and we're pretty impressed with you, and pleasure to have you come. And we're going to meet Monday night
Okay.
to discuss possibly choosing someone. But we'll be in touch. Probably the town administrator or one of us will be in touch.
Very good.
Either way. So pleasure to have you.
Very good. Thanks so much for your time and the opportunity this evening.
Thank you,
Very nice
Tom.
to
Wonderful to
Tom.
meet you, Tom. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break. Our next candidate will be here at 6 o'clock. o'clock.
I'll keep mine on then, I guess.
Well, hopefully yours comes with a good
Thank
story.
you.
then.
Welcome back. We have our third candidate here tonight, Kate Hodges. And if you would, what we'll do is we'll have you give us a little history and background about yourself and your experiences in schooling and so forth. And then our clerk of the Board of Select, Tina Hine, will have some questions. And our vice chair will have some questions, and then I will, and then we'll do a second round of questions, okay?
Sounds great.
So the floor is yours, Kate.
Okay. So I'm Kate Hodges. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me this evening. Let's see. I grew up in Hudson, right up 495, and I graduated from the University of Massachusetts Amherst with a bachelor's degree in sociology and minor in women's studies. I was the social behavioral science valedictorian for my class. From there, I was a social worker for the state of Massachusetts for both the Department of Youth Services and the Department of Mental Health. I worked for them for a while, and my college boyfriend became my fiance, and he received a job offer from a police department right outside of Hartford. So we moved to Connecticut, where I became the director of Parks and Recreation for the town of Coventry, Connecticut, which is right outside of Willimantic, very near UConn's main campus. During that time, we were undergoing kind of a transition in senior services and human services, and so our divisions actually merged together. We received a big state grant, and we're building a big senior center, so I did that for a while, and then my husband and I found out that we were going to be having twins.
Oh, boy.
And that was very exciting, but needed to be closer to family for obvious reasons, and we moved back to Massachusetts, where I took a job as a director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Education for the town of Littleton. My husband continued to commute for many years, about 8, and we have since moved to Stowe, in a nice home there.
That's a
where-
nice town.
Yeah, where we have an in-law suite where my parents are with us, which is excellent, and my husband works in the area as well. And I took the job as the assistant town manager at the time in 2015 with the town of Concord. I had received my master's degree in public administration shortly after my children were born. I went back at night. And so I've been doing that job since 2015. I received a promotion a couple of years ago to deputy town manager, and I oversee probably 14 different departments. I think the aggregate total of the number of employees in the departments that I serve as department head is somewhere around the 200 or so level. I have 14 direct reports, 2 of which are department heads. Many others are the division managers. And the divisions and departments that I oversee are Human Services, the Council on Aging, Recreation, Facilities, Sustainability, Public Information, the PEG Access Board. I oversee the administrative offices for the town manager, Veterans Affairs, Community Services, and a few others that are in there, in there somewhere. So I found that very attractive about the job. I thought that it was a good mix of new challenge and things that, such as recreation and human services, that I felt that I had a good handle on and wanted to sort of be an administrator of those. So it's been a very rewarding and challenging, and that's basically the background.
You really had quite a progression.
Yes.
And being an assistant town manager and then a deputy really must have given you quite a bit of insight to be able to possibly be a town administrator. So that's really great experience. Well, we're going to have Tina start to ask you questions.
Okay, Kate, so my first question is you were awarded the Kenneth Pickard Municipal Innovation Award in 2020, this year, so
Yes,
congratulations.
thank you.
Could you describe the work that you performed that led to you being selected for that award?
Sure, yes. Historically, and I'm sure that Concord is not unique in this, but we have the same people coming out to meetings and the same persons volunteering for boards, and that's great. But what we were lacking was the voices from the families in particular, people who really couldn't leave their children at 7 o'clock at night and come out to a meeting across town, but still wanted to be involved in the issues. And so with the, we hired a public information officer back in 2016. And over the course of time, we were using that to try to get the town's messages out. I think that towns are very good at getting some messages out, and then other times we're not good enough about getting out the good things that are happening. And so that was really what she was tasked with doing. So when we were coming into sort of the, she had been there for a few years and we had achieved those goals, we were saying, how can we get the community more involved? And at the time, I had negotiated a large land deal with a private landowner who owned 7 acres that was immediately adjacent to one of the ponds, and on the other side of it was near where the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Phase 2B is. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's basically the rail trail that runs from Chelmsford and will ultimately end up in Framingham. Right now, it's in West Concord, where it's going to be permitted for Sudbury. So this land piece was very important to the town. And so we were purchasing it and going to develop that for as a public park. And so we used that platform to try to do something a little bit atypical, which is to have a Facebook Live and Instagram Live public forum. So what we did was we called the meeting. If people wanted to come out into the site, it was absolutely fine. But if they couldn't, they were going to be able to watch on Facebook or Instagram Live, and the message for that was twofold. One is to get a social media presence, which we hadn't had before, and entice people. You had to like the town in order to be able to participate and see this. And the other was to really get the perspective and get the ideas and the needs of the people who we felt were going to be most using this park property. And so we did a virtual site tour, which was an interesting thing because when you're live, there's no delay in Facebook Live, and so navigating through the woods was an interesting feat. And but we did, and actually we ended up having about 700 people. Now Concord's population is well over 20,000, but having 700 people at any meeting,
That's big.
other than town meeting, was really extraordinary. And so what we did was we asked folks to submit their questions live. And so we set up a computer terminal. And so the questions that were, now many people did not submit questions as much as comments about your shoes or whatever else. So the ones that were relevant to the project, we ended up being able to read on screen and answer in real time. And we found that that was really helpful, and it helped in the development of that park project, which is actually currently going to permitting now.
Okay.
So.
And so the award was for the innovative approach you took in terms of social media and outreach to the
Yeah,
community?
it was
Okay.
just engaging the community in an atypical way.
Okay.
We now use that same live stream for all of our budget hearings and all of our pre-town meeting, or we call it the town meeting preview meetings, where we're talking about the warrant articles before we're in town meeting to kind of gather feedback. Part of that helps us to decide what is going to be appropriate to put on the consent agenda, and what other things are going to need more discussion. So we've been using that now for the past probably 2 years,
Okay.
and have found that to be a really effective way to get people who can't come out to a budget hearing at 7 o'clock at night
Yeah.
there. And we also tried to tie that in with sustainability a bit, because you can participate from your home and you don't need to get in your car and drive
Right.
here. And
Okay.
so we tried to make it sort of an initiative that way.
Okay. Again, congratulations. Describe a recent experience in which you resolved conflicted interests between departments, committees, or community groups. You listed quite a long list of departments that you work closely with. So could you describe, again, a recent experience where you had to resolve conflicted interests? And would you do anything differently if presented with the same situation again?
Sure. Well, I guess in keeping with the example I just gave about the park project, whenever any community is going to be spending several $1 million on developing something, there's always several different aspects. to take into account. The property that I was talking to you about, the 7 acres, had a single-family home on it that was in fine shape, but basically it was, plunked right into the center of the 7 acres on the best spot, obviously, because it was someone's house, in a clearing kind of on a grassy knoll overlooking the pond. And so to have a park with a home in the middle wouldn't have made a lot of sense, except for that. One of the major issues for the town of Concord is affordability and affordable housing. And so there was a large group that came out and said, it seems almost bad form to be leveling a perfectly fine, albeit dated, but a perfectly fine single-family home, when we're trying to have all of this affordable housing initiatives. And so what we ended up doing was we ended up subdividing the property in that if you were to enter into the property from the main road that it's on, there's a house lot immediately adjacent to that that actually has an affordable unit on it owned by the housing authority. So what we ended up doing was subdividing part of the property such that we were going to reposition the driveway so that we would, we got an easement from the state to come over. And so effectively what the driveway was kind of made that one parcel larger. Then we went to the zoning board and had that adopted, and so we're going to be turning the single-family home there into a duplex. And so it ends up that, we still can have the park. There was a little bit more design work and some real pushing at the state level to try to get the okay to cross over their easement. But I think that it was able to really capture the spirit of what the community wanted, which is, of course we want this property, of course we don't want someone's affordable home to be stuck in the middle of a park, but we don't feel right just obliterating it, and that's one less home that, is affordable. And so that was a very difficult, it held the project up for a bit. There were more design funds. I had to go back to town meeting and discuss that and really get that community support. The other thing that was a bit difficult is that the persons who we purchased the property from, were extremely interested in it being a park and had some really really difficult feelings, really hard feelings, and I didn't really quite understand why, about having a home there. I think the woman who grew up in the house felt like where she was living very close to where the prison was, and in her estimation, she always felt like she was on the wrong side of the tracks, and didn't really want a house to remain in that area because she said that it was going to effectively make someone else go through whatever pain she had done. And it took a while to understand that and kind of get through that. And so they had put a restriction when we purchased it that it could only be used for park property. We had to go back and renegotiate with them and say up to 1 unit of affordable housing can go in, and it can only go in this certain area. And ultimately they agreed. But it was interesting to meet with them and to hear her story. And I think that's sort of where the social work thing comes in, where you're trying to understand someone's perspective, because I couldn't understand why would this be a no. It seems like a win-win, but
Sure.
of course everybody is a product of their upbringing, so it was interesting to navigate that.
Okay. My next question is a bit of a pivot away from what you're talking about now. How do you define or identify a hardworking employee?
Yep. Well, I would say there's no one way of doing that. I think that for some employees, depending on what they're tasked with, it's the volume of the work that gets put out and the quality of the work that gets put out. And for others, it's sort of the passion and the drive. And I think it comes down to really trying to understand what motivates them and understand what the priorities are, in line with the priorities, obviously, of the selectmen and the community. And then really making sure that, there are goals and objectives and some timelines, and that those can be met. And that doesn't mean that if they're not met, that means the person isn't hardworking. And I think oftentimes that can be blurred. But I think the open communication is really important. With my department heads, I meet with them. I meet with 9 of them once a week, every week for an hour. And it really is a lot of sort of consensus building, team building, but also I want them to feel like they have my support. And I also want to feel like I'm involved. And so it's truly a partnership. With my smaller divisions, I meet every other week. But over the course of a month, we're talking about probably having anywhere between, 14 to 18 one-on-one meetings. That's different than the general staff meetings that we run, but it's important to have that. And I think I'm able to gauge progress and priorities and work ethic through sort of building that relationship instead of just saying, your evaluation is once a year, tell me everything that you've done. So I think the evaluation process is ongoing constantly.
Okay. Okay. Holliston has a number of significant projects in the pipeline, including an $8 million water treatment plant, water pipe replacements, a potentially new DPW facility, and potentially new high school. Other than the 7-acre purchase on the property that you described earlier, can you talk to us about your experience managing a large, complex project, either capital or non-capital?
Sure. Project management is one of my strengths. It's an area that I really thrive in. And I've been fortunate enough that the former town manager in Concord assigned me quite a few large-scale projects. So we have a beach project that's currently going. We had a brownfield or a redevelopment project where we created a solar field, turned it into a solar field. We had a very large road project that was basically repointing Route 62 over the MBTA railway, which can be a challenge just getting the MBTA to agree to anything or answer the phone. And the ability to be able to do that such that the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail could cross over without creating any type of traffic issue. Right now we have a $30 million road project that's going on one of our main roads, which is the Cambridge Turnpike. And that has been a challenge because there are underlying pipes that are under there that were abandoned, and one of them actually exploded. No one was injured, but so that's been a complicated project. And we're also working with the state on the bridge that's going to be going over Route 2 to connect the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. So there's quite a few projects in the pipeline as far as capital. The other large-scale project was our strategic master plan, and that's sort of a different animal than a construction project because it involved sort of 18 months of gathering data, collecting it, analyzing it, having focus groups, having large-scale meetings, having small-scale meetings, and we had a community group of 14 citizens that were on the Envision Concord board. And I ended up spearheading that with our Director of Planning and Land Management. And so I worked on that document, which I brought today, just to show you. And that was a very, very long-scale project with benchmarks that had to be hit, and we basically made sure that we were making small steps towards the larger goal to make sure that we had something in and out of 18 months. So I've been involved in quite a few projects in different array.
Okay, thank you.
John?
Just to piggyback a little bit on your answers to Tina's questions, Kate, tell me a little bit about, you use the word "we" a lot, the plural sense of project management, and I'm most concerned about your specific contributions. Use the Bruce Freeman Trail as an example. What did you specifically do on that project?
I negotiated I'm still negotiating with the state. I wrote the lease amendment. I got the insurance certificates. I have created the bid documents. I will be administering the bid package, and then ultimately executing the contract for the town manager to sign with the Prosper.
This Envision Concord document, you said that was 18 months in the making?
Yes.
And that's a master plan of such?
Yes.
Do you have a consultant working with you on that project?
We did. Not initially. We did 7 months of information gathering.
What did the consultant do?
They took the aggregate amount of that data and were able to quantify it with tables and charts.
Mm-hmm.
And then we separated into different buckets, which we called the big ideas, and then the small ideas underneath it, which is simply just a goals and objectives type of thing.
So they're behind the curtain doing all that aggregate work, and then they present you a product which is basically a bucket of data.
Mm-hmm.
What happens next?
We wrote it up. We went.
What does Kate do? I'm sorry.
I wrote it.
Okay, keep going. You write what?
I took the data and I ended up going to several different groups. We split the stakeholders in half, essentially. And so I went to the stakeholders and sort of presented them with the data, heard their reactions, heard their feedback, came back and wrote several different reports, which are now in this larger report. I also did the editing when it came
Are there
forward.
public hearings in this process too?
Yes, there were several.
Is that something you conduct? Are you heading up these public meetings? You're participating in them?
I ran two. The town manager, prior to his retirement, ran two. And then we had the consultant sit in on one where it was really just kind of it was a free form. We did it where people had to write the things that they wanted to see the most on a Post-it note, and we had different areas of the room. One was economic development, another one was human services, and so they basically wrote what they wanted in each of those buckets and stuck it on the wall.
Was this process, was it stressful at all?
Oh, yes,
Why?
absolutely.
Where did the stress come from?
The deadlines, the citizens sometimes, being able to make sure that everybody who wants to be heard has been heard. I'm sure that that's no secret to all of you, that sometimes everybody wants to talk at once, and sometimes somebody is a bit fearful, so we try to implement a everyone talks once before someone talks twice. But again, these are adults, and they're citizens, and we want to hear what they have to say. And I would say that the timeline, I know when you say it takes 18 months to make a report, it seems like that's a very long time, but to us, the timeline was quite tight because we were trying to utilize this both for, the budget presentation. Economic development was a big one that was here, and we were trying to use that as a catalyst to perhaps get the community to get behind the idea of having someone for economic development. And so trying to align that with the budget process was difficult, and that's stressful.
Take me to the Concord org chart for just a brief second, so I understand how, because it's a good-sized town, how it's structured. You've got a town manager in Concord, right?
That's correct.
Who directly reports to your town manager?
Myself, the Director of Planning and Land Management, the Police Chief, the Fire Chief, the Finance, well, actually, I'm sorry, they changed her title. She's the CI, Chief Financial Officer, Human Resources, and the Director of Public Works.
Okay. And as a deputy town manager now,
Correct.
you don't oversee any financial operations or HR?
I do not oversee the department heads, no, but I'm responsible for the budgets within my divisions, which include general fund, enterprise, and revolving.
Got it.
And as far as HR, and I actually, we work very closely because I negotiate the police, fire, and public safety dispatch contracts. And so I serve as the lead on two of those, and then, and not the lead on the others. I believe the town manager did that. And part of that was just my skill set, happened to be, I think the former town manager sort of, assigned me duties that he was thinking I would be successful doing, which I was appreciative of. And
Got it.
so, I do that. And I do the grievance hearings and other HR-related things.
In your resume, one of the bullets that caught my eye was, and I'll read it, annually assisting in the preparation of the town budget, including general fund, capital OPEB, and debt service plans, drafting, editing, and overseeing the distribution of all town reports and publications, including annual special and town meeting warrants, town and finance committee reports, and the required state audit statements. You do this?
Yes, I do.
The CFO doesn't contribute to these elements?
She certainly does, but the town meeting warrant in
Yes.
particular comes out of the town manager's office. As the interim town manager and then deputy with the new town manager, I actually wrote the warrant myself this year, and so I brought that in case you wanted to take a look at it. But that
Thank you.
is, if you're looking for things that I did,
That's a good that's a good thing right there. I'll tell you. What part of the financial? Because later on we have some pieces that were given to us by Paradigm that indicate Kate worked with the finance director to craft the operating budget. What year was that, and why would that have been different than any other year?
I've done that almost every year. I did that the last year of being an assistant and every year since being deputy.
I see. So it's something that evolved since you were assistant, and now it's part of your deputy job description.
That's correct.
Okay, and that is, in large part, it sounds like creating each warrant. Are you liaison with your finance? Do you have a finance committee?
We do.
Who's the main liaison with your finance committee?
The chief financial officer is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you go to their meetings? Do you collaborate?
I do. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So currently, we have the town manager is, really presenting the general fund appropriational budgets at town meeting, and I'm responsible for presenting capital and enterprise. And so we've split it like that. I think just so that it isn't quite so daunting to just one individual. But that's at the preference and discretion of the manager. The manager before this one really was sort of looking to take a step back. He was going to retire, and I think appropriately was trying to give me some more exposure. And so that other year, last year, I presented that with the finance director, and he did not.
What did you present?
The budget, the general
The
fund.
entire budget?
The general fund appropriation, correct, both at finance committee and at town meeting, at his request. But it is still the town manager's budget.
I'm a little confused over the role. It sounds like you have a very integral role now as the deputy with the financial documentation, but I can't see where the CFO is doing his or her work. Like, how do they get into the warrant? How do they prepare budgets? How do they liaison with the finance committee? It seems like you only have to have one voice. Am I missing something?
Yeah, I don't think that that's the case. What happens, it might be helpful if I take you from the beginning. What happens is that we're given budget sheets, which are effectively a regurgitation of here's what you got last year.
Sure.
And you submit that to my office and to the finance director's office. And her team and I meet, and we basically go through them and say, are we within the finance committee's guidelines? Because that's always the goal, is to be within the guideline. And then when we have whittled it down a bit so that we could be in the ballpark of the guideline, we bring the town manager in and we say, you can have this and you can have this and you can have this, or you pull this out, and those are like the high level decisions that he has had to make in the past. The finance director then goes back and puts that all on a spreadsheet. So I would say that our finance director is really responsible for the data part of it, and how to get that into something that, number one, we want to put into the community, and number two, has sort of the words behind it and the reasonings. That's something that I've taken on. So it's a partnership for
No,
sure.
I understand. Okay. Words and numbers. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit more about your financial background, the schooling? Obviously, when you became a deputy administrator, you stepped into more of the financial budgeting and so forth, but can you tell us about your schooling and your education in that realm?
Sure. I mean, I made a conscious decision when going back to get my master's degree to have a master's degree in public administration and not an MBA. I am not an accountant. I don't pretend to be one. I'm a competent manager who can perform these duties. But that being said, I don't have an MBA. So what I bring to the table, I think, is general oversight of the budget. I know the process. I know the process inside and out. I can articulate the reasons why, providing I understand them. I take the time. I'm an accomplished writer. I can do all of that, but if you're looking for sort of someone to do the long-term forecasting and other things like that, that isn't something that I ever took a class in. It doesn't mean that I couldn't do it, but it isn't something that I've taken a class in. I think my skill set and the things that I do well really revolve around the managerial piece. That's where I excel.
Okay, great. And can you tell us a little bit about your goal setting, how you structure things to get from A to Z?
Sure. So in general, The select board will decide what the goals and objectives are, usually right after the election. They have a goal-setting strategy. And we take those back to the town manager's office and sort of put them in the buckets of what divisions and departments those are in. I've been fortunate enough that most of the initiatives that the town has wanted to take on were that of new departments, including sustainability, public information, and facilities. And so all three of those departments ended up being under my office. Those are my direct reports. And so it was interesting to try to take something that had never existed before and kind of have a goal and objective. And so what we do is small wins to the big project. So again, in the meetings, we outline what are the low-hanging fruit, the measurable goals. And then we have a long-term plan. And so we do set deadlines. I'm happy to say that for most of the time we meet them, but then, we have hired an economic and tourism person. The person was working for 5 months, hit the ground running, and then COVID hit. And so now we're trying to deal with what the new normal is. And so I would have to say that, in a conventional system where, you're doing a building project and you're saying, this is the milestone we're going to get to on this day, and this is the milestone, that's no problem. When you're talking about perception and, basically getting to the end where people think that, we're meeting the goals that were outlined in Envision Concord such that, we have an economic vitality system, it's harder because it's a moving target. Right. And so I think that it's constant conversation and the ability to really sort of ebbs and flows, the ability to multitask, and sometimes just have a little bit of humor.
Right. Can you describe the relationship that you envision working with the select board? What would you consider to be ideal?
Ideal. Well, I guess I'd like to work with a select board who was clear about their goals and objectives, so I knew what it was that were the priorities of the board, and to make sure that I was comfortable that those priorities were in line with the priorities of the community. I'd like to have a board that if I have a question, I could pick up and make a phone call, and if I make a mistake, which we're all bound to do, that the board would work with me in a spirit of understanding and collaboration. I don't believe that I need to be micromanaged, but I do think that the best working relationships come when it's open and honest communication. And so, much like I do with my own staff, if I'm headed down a path that the board is not happy with, it would be helpful to know that before I reach the end.
Right.
And so I think just having kind of that constant communication where, you don't have to be afraid to say, I need you to change gears, or you're not doing this, but,
Right.
so I have a clear understanding of what's expected of me.
In your relationship with the Finance Committee, what would you describe as that relationship would
The
be?
Finance Committee staff person is our finance director. And so I attend some meetings, particularly when I have to discuss either capital needs or budget overrides, which doesn't happen all that often, or just in the general presentation for getting prepared for the warrant. But they meet twice a month, and I don't attend every one. And the town manager doesn't either, frankly.
Yeah. So, but when it's budget season, you probably attend them more.
That's correct.
Okay. Second round of questions.
Sure, yeah, Kate. So in Concord, and the way you describe it, you have a large number of staffing resources available to you. That won't be the same here in Holliston. We're a much smaller town in size, but also in terms of staffing resources. What challenges is that going to present to you, where in listening to you speak enthusiastically about the number of interactions you have with a variety of numbers of different staff and departments. So what challenges do you see coming into a smaller town hall?
Sure. I'm not quite sure that I see that as a challenge. If you were to ask why Holliston, I would say that was one of the things that drew me to the community. I didn't apply for the town manager position in Concord because I am really, really want to be a doer. I really want to be a hands-on manager. And that form of government and sort of the size of it doesn't allow for that. And that was not appealing to me. And so that was very appealing to me here, which does not mean that, you know, there isn't room for growth and that there may be a development someday. I see that you all are going to be hiring a part-time sustainability person, perhaps, and that's really exciting. And so the thought was, perhaps if that becomes something that is a full-time job, of course, you know, we would move forward with that. But the ability to really have a role to play, more than just as a figurehead or someone to make one or two decisions in a given week is what was appealing to me in a smaller community. So I'm sure there will be challenges. Before my time in Concord, I worked in Littleton. And Littleton had a similar situation where, you know, there weren't several department heads. You know, the assistant treasurer was the HR director, and that was an interesting kind of dichotomy. And so I found that to be an area where, you know, we did a lot of good there. And we were able to really think outside of the box and be very stringent with our use of resources. And that's helpful. And I think the larger communities or the more affluent communities that you go to, sometimes people forget how to look under the rug or rub two pennies together. They just think, you know, if we put some money into this, you know, and I think it sometimes leads to complacency. I'm not saying that we have that, but we could.
Okay. The next question I have is, given the level of detail you describe, I'm looking at your documents here that you brought to share, how do you delegate? Is that a strength of yours? Is that a weakness, to delegate to others to perform tasks that you maybe otherwise would be doing on your own?
Well, I'm going to be honest. It depends on the project, because, but I am getting better because I have more resources to be able to do that. So I think in Littleton, I didn't really have the ability to delegate too much because I didn't have anyone to delegate it to. And I think throughout the years in Concord, I try to assign work to people that I think, number one, that they'll enjoy, and number two, that they will do well, that fits their skill set. And so over the past several years, I've had to do that. And my example, at least as of late, is with our sustainability director. We started a municipal vulnerability preparedness study, townwide study, which we received a grant for $30,000 to do. And we're going to have this environmental plan. The town meeting 2 years ago set a lofty goal of reducing Concord's greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2030, which is a frightening goal because it's very aggressive. And I can't be involved in that as much as I want to, in that, you know, there was all of the community meetings, and it was similar to Envision Concord on a smaller scale to try to figure out, you know, what are the things. We have 3 rivers in Concord, so of course the water level rising. We too we have an older water system, and we have a water supply that actually isn't in Concord, it's out of town, and that led to some litigation. And so kind of dealing with all of those things didn't mean that I could kind of get down into the weeds and really write the plan. And so I delegated that to our sustainability director, and said, my door is always open, I'm happy to help, but, you know, she just gave me the first draft, and it's wonderful. I mean, it really is. She's done such a great job, and really was very appreciative of, you know, me being able to say, you got this, you can do this, come back to me if you need the help. And so I think it's as rewarding for the person that you give it to, if they feel like it's a good learning experience. So, you know, that's what I would say on that one.
Okay.
John?
Kate, if you could hire staff, should you be hired here in Holliston, to complement the kind of work that has to come out of the town administrator's office, what kind of skills and positions would you be looking to fill? What are you looking for?
I believe that I would be looking for somebody with a heavy finance background. And not in the same sense as writing the warrant and doing any of that, but some of the more technical, long-term, forecasting and trends analysis and things like that, not only do I not do, it's not really within my wheelhouse. It's not something that drives me or motivates me. And I think that could be in the form of perhaps an assistant that's heavy with that, or just a plain old finance director, but someone that can work with the finance committee and myself to really make sure that we have both the project management and managerial aspects covered in my skill set, and then the financial management and analysis. And it's the analysis that really is important, and I recognize that.
How will you know in a year, should you be hired, that you've been successful here? What did you achieve?
Well, a year, it isn't very long. So I guess that starts with the board. What does the board want in the first 6 months as far as sort of a measurable unit? I understand that you've started the master planning process, but then obviously we have the pandemic issue. So what is the board's expectation of where that will be in 6 months? Where is the board's expectation of where that will be in a year? And maybe that's an iterative process, that it has to be a communication, that we work together.
Well, I think we'd all agree that as long as the board feels as though you've achieved the goals that are laid out in your performance evaluation, that's a good answer. But personally, how would you know that you've done a good job? What kind of things are you going to look at in a year and say, wow, I did good?
I think the relationship building with the other department heads, making sure that we are maintaining our financial stability, making sure that we can increase citizen participation if that's something that we need to do, that projects are met, project timelines are met, that there's progress towards the things that the community is struggling with, the wastewater and the water treatment facility. So that's how I would measure it, and I would measure it by the community's reaction to me as the, one of the town leaders. And I guess that is hard to quantify, but there would have to be a way where people feel like it's an open door policy, and people feel like they're happy that I was the choice. And I won't know that until you sort of can feel that from people, but I know that in the other communities that I've been with, after a time, people are genuinely happy that I was the choice. And so that's how I measure it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your capital planning experiences?
Sure. So in my current position, I am basically the presenter and sort of the person who deals with the capital planning. So it has historically been that capital planning forms come out in August, and they're given to the department heads. And we have several different types, equipment, new or replacement, parcels of land or buildings that need to be purchased. Those are rare, but still. Equipment, infrastructure. And so they all come in, and basically we ask all of the department heads, submit what you want, basically the wish list, knowing that you're not going to get all of it. And then we sit down as a senior management team, and we go through what are the ones that we think might be either the most pressing because there's a need because something's breaking or we're contractually obligated to do it. And then what are things that are in line with what now we're using Envision Concord, but prior to with the former long-range plan. The former long-range plan had a lot of emphasis on purchasing open space and maintaining sort of the rural character. And so a lot of capital money went into purchasing these properties from landowners as they were, basically aging in place, deciding that they were going to move somewhere, and then, giving the right of first refusal to the town. That I think we've achieved those goals, and so now we're moving towards economic vitality. And so we prioritize based on that for the current year. Doing that, our finance director ends up giving us a list of sort of, here's what we're going to have available over a 10-year span, and where we are in the debt ratio. And so recently, Concord has decided to do a feasibility study to replace the middle school. And so our finance director was able to give to us sort of, if that goes through, here's how much, we're going to be paying in debt, and so here's how much is going to be left for capital, and trying to reprioritize and spread it out over this 10-year period so that we basically keep the same debt level, and we're spacing out the larger capital projects. I mean, the middle school is estimated to be a $90 million building, so it stands to reason that we're not going to have another multi-million-dollar project for at least 10 years. What does that mean?
Right.
So that has been my experience with that. Bringing that into a plan, obviously putting it in the warrant, but then we also do town meeting preview meetings, and so then having that and have an open forum, and then allowing the citizens to have dialogue there. People saying, well, we'd rather have a new police station before a middle school, or we'd rather have a middle school before a police station, and kind of saying to them, well, they can't happen simultaneously.
Right. Interesting. What kind of experience do you have with the school committee and working with them with their needs and working as a liaison with the town manager?
So we have two school committees because the high school is a regional high school. And so the school district, regional school districts, really operates independent of the town. It's almost like it's a separate municipal entity. Our relationship with the Concord School Committee is much tighter because through Recreation and Human Services, we're working together quite a bit. The high school, despite the fact that it's the region, since we've taken over the PEG, which is the Public Government and Educational Station, cable station, that's actually located, that studio is located in the high school. And so when we were taking that over from an independent nonprofit, there was a lot of work that went into doing that with the school committee. I would say that as far as face-to-face involvement in project management, I really work with the superintendent. The superintendent, particularly since COVID has hit, has been a real partner with us because childcare is an issue for everyone. And so we are currently right now trying to work on a plan A and B for what's going to happen come September, if and when it's decided that school isn't going to be as it was per usual back in February. And so those are the type of things that we work on. We have shared fields and facilities. I'm also in charge of the Parks and Playgrounds Division, and so we maintain those fields, but it really is sort of a partnership to understand that what are the school needs for that, and so we work on capital planning together relative to using the school money for the fields.
Great. Tina, do you have one more question?
Well, yeah, I've asked it of everybody. I'll ask it of you, Kate. In a perfect world, what would be your ideal mode of transportation to work?
Well, my ideal, I would love to bike or run to work, except for I think you'd need a place to wash up afterwards. But I said it at the other interview on Zoom. Someone asked about the work-life balance, sort of, and how to handle stress. And I run at lunch currently.
That's a good way to get rid of stress.
It's just to think and zone out, and I've done that for years. I started that back when I was in Littleton, and I try to do it 3 days a week. I definitely at least get 2 days in, and so that is sort of my release. And since COVID has hit, my children have found their bikes to be a new means of freedom.
Yeah,
and
really.
so we've kind of reinvigorated a love of biking. You kind of you forget, So
Yeah.
So I would say yes. I'm not sure how feasible it would be to bike from Stowe to Holliston. I think I'd be late. But
It might not work out well, Mrs. Hine.
You're a quarter mile here in the office from the bike trail.
Well, I got here early, so we took a drive over there, and that is one of the first things I said to my husband. Do you see how close that trail is? And he was like, the lever doesn't change your spots.
That's right. 6.7 miles.
Excellent.
And John has one more last question to ask you.
We're mindful, Kate, that with this interview today, that you're also probably interviewing us. So a couple things. First, how did we do? And number two, do you have any questions for us?
You did fine. You seem like such a great group. This community is beautiful. It's very awkward.
With a mask, isn't it awful? Yeah.
And I feel like,
And we feel bad we're not able to shake anybody's hand.
I know. But no, you did fine. The questions were good. They're good questions. They're thought-provoking.
Do you have questions for us?
Well, I guess I'm curious, so your current town administrator will be retiring?
Yes.
July
in a-
12th.
July 12th.
Okay, in about a month. And so when are you thinking that you would like your future town administrator to begin?
July 13th.
You asked.
I see. Well, I'd like an honest answer, I see. And has somebody kind of addressed or started to work with what your entrance plan is going to be, as far as, is the hope that things, when we enter stage 4 of the governor's plans, that we can go back to business as usual, or has the community really wanted to see some type of change in that they have, say, a team A and on some days and team B on another?
Are you talking about schools?
No, I'm talking about in
the town hall.
town hall,
I see.
like, because I'm seeing more and more communities go to that, and I think that there's a level of difficulty that comes with only having half of
Yeah,
the
we'd
crew
like
in
to,
every other day or something.
we'd like to go back to normalcy, but we're not sure what that's going to be.
The gentleman sitting behind you is our fire chief and our emergency management director, and he's been very active working on a reentry plan for town employees. Make safe the workplace first and begin a reentry program that includes some modified work schedules and certainly social distancing and restricted access and so forth to certain areas. So,
Sure.
does anyone anything you want to add to that, Chief, in terms of the public?
You covered it great.
Okay, there you go.
And so I guess my last question is, I know about the water and I know about the long-range plan. Is there any other very, large-scale project or initiative that you see, in the horizon, at least in the next 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, I think we're going to try to focus on horizontal infrastructure. We've been talking with the Finance Committee. I think we need more work, more communication, more planning around improved water pipe replacement, sidewalks, street improvements, and so forth. Our water is our most precious resource, and we, in addition to the water treatment plant that you mentioned, Kate, there's a serious interest in the town to make sure that as we go forward, we design the infrastructure to reflect the growing needs of the community. We have a beautiful rail trail now that we want to interconnect to the town to make full use of the recreational opportunities. So, and we also think that has an economic benefit. So we're anxious to get that off the ground. But right now, as everybody has said, COVID has kind of stopped everything dead in its tracks. Our town meeting in July will be austere. We're looking at just a scaled-back version of basically an omnibus and a bunch of necessary warrants, with the hope that we'll see some normalcy by the fall when we can start talking about these major policy issues.
Kate, I would add that we have a new solar project going in at our landfill up where our old trash dump was.
Yeah.
That's a project that will hopefully cross the finish line in terms of a contract a little before, a little after, but around the time that you're starting. But that'll be an ongoing project that would be going through until, I think, early 2021.
About a year from now, they're looking to flip the switch.
Yeah, so that's a big project. It taps into the community's strong interest in green renewable energy sources and our interest in lowering carbon footprints in general and sustainability and so on. I see that project growing into other newer projects in line with those efforts. So, but that'll certainly be an ongoing project.
That's exciting.
For the new hire.
That's great. That's great.
So, Kate, we want to thank you.
Thank you.
For coming to visit us tonight. You are one of the 3 top candidates, so obviously you come to us with a lot of superlatives, and we're very pleased to meet you.
Very pleased.
We're having a meeting Monday night, and on the agenda is to discuss a choice or how to move forward with candidates. So thank you again. You'll be hearing from one of us,
Great.
and have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
your
Kate. Very
time.
nice to
Take
meet
care,
you.
Kate. Thank you so much.
Okay, I will take a motion unless you want to, you would both like to talk some more, but I think we're going to be, it's on the agenda for Monday, so maybe think about what you
Yeah, I'm
heard.
glad for the opportunity to think, because my head's
Yeah, I
swimming.
think it's important to
It's a
think.
lot to
and
think about.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn at 7:11 p.m.
We have a
Second.
second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, folks. I hope you enjoyed watching the candidates. Good night.